Long before I ever stepped foot in Montclair district, I believed quiet places were safe. That was the lie I carried with me, a soft, comforting illusion I'd crafted to survive the wreckage of the life I'd left behind in Minnesota. I came to France chasing stillness, thinking stillness would heal me. But Montclair's stillness had a different weight. It wasn't peace. It was observation. I remember the first night I walked down Rue de la Miette, the narrow cobblestone street that led to the patisserie where I'd worked the night shift. The air smelled of old stone and rising dough, and something else I couldn't place, like a memory waiting to be remembered. When the church bells rang 12:17 a.m., the whole district trembled with the sound. It felt as if the past itself was shaking off dust. Le Deux Choux was a tiny shop wedged between an abandoned print store and a florist who never opened before noon. My boss, Madame Verdun, trusted me with the night hours because young eyes stay awake longer. I didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't sleep much anyway. My routine kept me sane: unlock the door, tie my apron twice, prep the pastries, restock the display, sweep the floor, count the register. I followed it religiously, partly out of habit, partly because ritual felt like my last anchor. Then the doorbell chimed at 11:52 p.m. every single night. Same minute, same low jingle that echoed too loudly for such a small space. That was when he started coming in. I noticed him first by the coat, a charcoal wool thing that belonged in a winter storm, not a mild spring night. He moved like he was measuring each step. His voice stayed even, expressionless. One pain au chocolat, the usual. He said it without ever looking at the pastry. His eyes stayed on me, tracing the way I moved. Not flirtatious, not shy, calculating. At first, I thought maybe he was lonely. People come to bakeries for warmth, not just food. But the way his gaze clung to my routine, memorizing every motion like he was cataloging me, I knew this wasn't simple. Something about him tightened the air around us, and I would soon learn that being watched can feel far worse than being followed. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just jumpy in a foreign country, working a lonely shift. But his pattern didn't change. Not once. 11:52 p.m., the bell, the charcoal coat, the same unblinking stare. He always ordered one item, always paid in exact change, always left within 2 minutes. His voice never rose or fell, like he'd rehearsed it. "You worked very precisely," he said one night, his tone casual but his eyes razor sharp. People with routines are dependable. I laughed awkwardly, pretending the words didn't land like weights. Routines help the night pass faster. "I know," he murmured. I watched the street. I notice everything that repeats. Something in my chest tightened. After that, I started breaking my routine in small ways. Switching the order I prepped pastries, leaving a light off, sweeping from right to left instead of left to right. The first night I changed it. He paused. A full, frozen second. "You moved the register counter earlier," he noted, eyes narrowing with unsettling accuracy. I swallowed. New habit. Habits don't change without reason. His words weren't a question, they were an evaluation. I forced a smile, slid the pastry bag across the counter, and kept my breath steady until he walked out. When he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, letting the quiet fill my lungs. My heart hammered louder than the old refrigerator buzzing in the corner. At 1:08 a.m., when I finally stepped outside, the street was cold, almost metallic. The lamplight flickered the one across from the closed print shop, the same one he always walked past. That was when I noticed the car. A vintage Peugeot. Dull silver, paint chipped along the edges. It idled slowly. Headlights off. Positioned toward the patisserie door, and inside, a silhouette. His silhouette. I hurried home faster than usual. That night, I slept with my shoes still on, my bag within reach. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I kept thinking maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe I was dramatizing. But deep down, something had already shifted inside me. Safety had become a memory. The night things escalated began like every other, a quiet patisserie, the hum of ovens, and my heartbeat trying to outrun my thoughts. I checked the clock every few minutes, waiting for the inevitable arrival of 11:52 p.m. I told myself I wasn't afraid, but fear has a way of settling under the skin, humming like a wire. When the bell chimed, I didn't even look up. My body recognized him before my eyes did. Same coat, same steady footsteps, but something was different. He didn't go to the counter immediately. Instead, he paused near the window, looking not at me, but at his reflection, adjusting the collar of his coat like he was preparing for something. Then he turned, face expressionless. "Do you ever feel like the street is listening?" The question froze me. My hand tightened around the pastry tongs. "I've never thought about it," I said carefully. "You should. Some streets have memory." His gaze drifted up the length of my apron tie, which I had intentionally changed that night, looping it only once. "You break your patterns often now," he said softly. "Is there a reason?" "No reason," I replied, my voice failing to hide the tremor. "Routine gets boring. Not yours." He stepped closer. Too close. I felt the weight of his presence like pressure against my ribs. Then, as quickly as he'd approached, he stepped back, placed exact change on the counter, and walked out without his pastry. The doorbell chimed behind him. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down on the stool in the back room. Something in his eyes had changed, like he'd made a decision. At closing time, I didn't linger. I locked up and stepped into the cold air, pulling my coat tighter. My apartment was 10 minutes away, but every shadow felt longer that night. Halfway down the street, headlights flared behind me. Slow, controlled. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I felt him. My phone buzzed, my friend Rowan calling unexpectedly. "Elara," she whispered, voice groggy. "Why is there a car outside your building?" "Someone's been idling for 10 minutes. My chest collapsed inward. "I'm 2 blocks away," I whispered back. "Don't hang up." The car stayed behind me, never closer, never farther. As if matching my breath, when I finally reached my building, the headlights dimmed but didn't turn off. He was waiting. I ran up the old stone stairwell, the echo of my footsteps overlapping with Rowan's frantic voice in my ear. My apartment on the 4th floor felt painfully far away. "Elara, he hasn't moved," she whispered. "He's parked right under your window now." I slammed my apartment door shut, locked it, then shoved a chair underneath the handle. My breath trembled out of me in uneven waves. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp near the bookshelf. Slowly, I approached the window and pulled the curtain a fraction aside. There it was, the same vintage Peugeot, its dull silver body reflecting the street lamp like an unblinking eye. The engine vibrated gently, the car angled directly at my window. I couldn't see inside, not fully, but I knew he was looking up. "He's not leaving," I murmured. "Call the police," Rowan urged, but part of me hesitated. Fear does strange things. It convinces you not to make noise, not to draw attention, not to provoke the threat staring at you from the street. So I stayed by the window, spine pressed against the cold wall, watching that car like it was alive. Minutes stretched into hours. 2:03 a.m., 2:47 a.m., 3:12 a.m. The engine kept purring, a low growl vibrating through the night. Once, I thought I saw the outline of a head tilt upward, but maybe it was my panic distorting shadows. At 3:44 a.m., silence fell. Not peaceful silence, vacuum silence. I peeked again. The car was gone, vanished, as if erased. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, Rowan came over, looked at my pale face, and hugged me so tightly I almost cried. By noon, we filed a report with the local police. They asked questions, took notes, nodded, sympathetically. But I could tell by their faces that without proof, without a license plate, without a threat spoken aloud, this would go nowhere. The next afternoon, I got a call. A Peugeot matching my description had been found abandoned near Place de la Lumière. They asked if I'd come identify it. When I arrived, officers stood around the open car door with uneasy expressions. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay a leather-bound notebook, old, worn, pages filled in tight black ink. They handed it to me. The first page made my stomach twist, a sketch of me brushing my hair through my bedroom window. I felt everything inside me go still. I sat on the police bench with the notebook resting on my knees, afraid to turn the pages, but even more afraid not to. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. Every sketch was of me, from angles no one should have been able to see unless they'd been standing outside my window, night after night, watching me live inside what I thought was safety. Me pouring tea in the kitchen, me folding laundry, Me sitting cross-legged on the sofa reading. Me brushing crumbs off my pajama shirt after a midnight snack. Small, private moments. Intimate moments. Moments that were supposed to belong only to me. The drawings weren't frantic or messy. They were detailed, patient, observant. He had studied me the way someone studies a map they intend to follow. The last page wasn't a sketch. It was a sentence. When she breaks her pattern completely, I will approach. Authorities searched the car, the nearby streets, the abandoned buildings. Nothing. No fingerprints, no registration, no identification. The Peugeot itself had been wiped clean. To them, the man in the charcoal coat became an unsolvable mystery. To me, he became a shadow, stitched into my memory. I left Montclair 2 days later, packed my things before dawn, gave my apartment keys to the landlord, and boarded the first train heading toward the coast. I didn't care where it went, only that it went away from him. My new apartment is small, bright, and close enough to the ocean that I can hear waves instead of car engines at night. I keep my curtains closed. I sleep with lights on. I don't keep routines anymore. But fear has a long half-life. Last week, at 12:17 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of an engine idling somewhere outside. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just another car. Maybe a coincidence. But I stayed awake until sunrise anyway. There are moments now when I pass a shop window and swear I see a charcoal coat reflected behind me. When footsteps fall a little too perfectly in sync with mine. When I catch myself following a routine without meaning to, and immediately break it. Because I learned something in Montclair. Something uncomfortable but true. Moral lesson. Never assume quiet places or predictable routines will keep you safe. Patterns make life easier, but they also make you visible. And sometimes, the greatest danger isn't the stranger you meet, but the one who has been watching long before you ever noticed. People always assume the desert is empty, but I learned early that emptiness can hold more danger than anything else. I was 29 when I took the night shift manager job at the Mirage Outpost, a lonely fuel stop scraping the eastern edge of the Karakum Desert. Back then, I'd convinced myself that isolation was good for me. Quiet days, silent nights, no one asking where I'd been or why I preferred keeping distance from everyone. But that comfort faded the moment the owner vanished. No goodbye, no message, no keys dropped off. Just gone. One day he locked up at dawn, and by nightfall his apartment above the supply shed was cleared out, like he'd never existed. I didn't have the luxury to quit. I needed the paycheck, and the outpost needed someone to keep the lights on. So I worked every night, and the desert worked on me. People talked about strange things happening out there, unmarked vehicles, radio interference, lights flickering for no reason. I ignored the stories until they became my reality. Some nights, the wind sounded too deliberate, scraping the siding like it had fingers. Other nights, the security monitors would cut out in perfect intervals, each blackout lasting precisely 8 seconds. I timed it. Every time I tried to record it, the cameras behaved perfectly. The night always knew when it was being watched, but the worst part was the pattern. Once every few weeks, sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m., the door sensor would beep even though nobody came inside. I'd step to the window, catch a movement just outside the light range like someone stepping back into the dark. Once, I called out, "Hello," and the movement froze. I didn't repeat that mistake. My trailer sat behind the outpost, small, dented, and always colder than it should have been at night. I pretended it was home. I pretended nothing was wrong, until the night everything stopped pretending. That night was 2:48 a.m. The exact time the owner supposedly disappeared 2 months earlier. I remember thinking the night felt heavier, like the desert was holding its breath. I had no idea yet, but I was about to understand why the locals called this place the Oasis Waypoint, because whatever watched the desert didn't care about the living or the dead. It cared about the ones who stayed, and I had stayed far too long. The buzz of the door sensor jerked my head up. That sound always hit like someone snapping a rubber band against my spine, especially on a night that already felt wrong. I checked the glass, no customer. Just the sliding doors closed tight, their reflections staring back at me like uncertain eyes. The wind outside shifted the dust in a slow ripple. Nothing unusual, I told myself, though I'd said that far too many nights. I turned back to the register, trying to shake off the unease, when headlights appeared across the lot. A dust-coated sedan rolled up and stopped in a crooked angle facing the storefront. The driver kept the engine running but didn't get out, didn't even turn the wheel straight. Just sat there like waiting was the whole purpose. Before I could decide whether to approach or ignore it, a second set of lights emerged from the opposite direction. A windowless utility truck, older than anything that should have been running these roads, coasted into the lot and stopped on the far side. Two vehicles, opposite ends, facing each other. The store caught between them like a caught breath. The sedan blinked its headlights 2 long flashes. The truck answered with a single, short one. My stomach dropped. I whispered, "Not again," even though I didn't know when "again" had officially begun. Maybe the first time I heard the 8-second power dip. Maybe earlier. I slid the bolt on the front door, stepped back behind the counter, and tried to slow my breathing. The radio on my belt suddenly hissed with static. That wasn't unusual. What came next was a voice, thin, muffled, like speaking through sand, whispered, "Stay inside. Do not approach. They watch movement." I froze. The voice didn't match any channel I used, and I recognized something else. Fear, layered inside the words, like whoever spoke barely whispered fast enough. My hand shook against the radio. "Who is this? Identify yourself." Static. Not the soft kind, the tearing kind. Then, out of nowhere, a camper pulled in, a family of 3 tourists, judging by the dust-stained maps stuck to their windshield. The father stepped out, noticed the vehicles, and immediately turned white. He backed toward his camper, muttering, "Get inside. Don't make noise." They didn't attempt to enter the store. They just locked themselves away and shut every light off. The vehicles blinked again, 2 long flashes, 1 short, and something in the back of my mind whispered, "You shouldn't be here either." I dimmed the outpost lights, hoping to make myself less of a target, but the moment I did, both vehicles reacted. Their headlights flickered fast, like some kind of silent argument. The sedan shifted a few feet closer. The truck angled itself inward. The gap between them narrowed, as if they wanted to what? Corner the store? Trap everything inside? I stepped away from the window, pulse hammering in my ears. I considered running to my trailer, but the idea of stepping outside made my skin crawl. The night felt like it had eyes. My radio crackled again. "Sunrise. Don't leave." The rest dissolved into static. I whispered to no one. "What are you trying to tell me?" No answer. Time slowed into something thick and suffocating. I kept checking the clock, but minutes stretched into an eternity. Every time I dared a glance outside, the vehicles had moved. Not enough to catch them in motion, just enough to be impossible. A few inches here, a few degrees of angle there, but always closer, always adjusting as if responding to something I couldn't see. Once, I switched on the exterior lights again, hoping to scare them off. The bulbs flickered twice and shut down completely, leaving only emergency backup, dimming the lot in an anemic glow. When the lights surged back on, the sedan was perfectly centered in front of the door, nose almost touching the entrance mat. I stumbled backward. Across the lot, the family stayed hidden. The camper didn't move, not even a curtain shift. I admired their fear. It kept them alive. The wind outside began circling in uneven swirls, dragging sand around the lot like shallow water currents. It looked almost purposeful, like something walking through it without showing its body. I rubbed my face and told myself I was imagining it. Exhaustion, stress, poor lighting, those excuses usually patched the holes in my fear. But not tonight, because then I saw the figures, reflected faintly in the windows of both vehicles, faint silhouettes sitting in the driver's seats. Not moving, not turning, just watching. I blinked hard, looked again, gone, or maybe they hadn't been there at all. The hours refused to move, stretching into a shape that felt almost inhuman. I didn't know what the desert wanted, but I knew this much. It didn't want us to leave, not until sunrise. Around 5:10 a.m., the first faint streak of dawn peeled across the dunes like a small mercy. I'd never been more grateful to see sunlight, even if it came weak and watered down. The moment The sky lightened. Something changed. The vehicle stopped moving. The wind dropped to nothing. The air felt too still, like the desert was listening. I watched closely, expecting the engines to rev, the doors to swing open, or someone to reveal themselves. Nothing happened. No noise, no figures, no sign of life. The camper door cracked open just a sliver. The father peeked out cautiously, eyes swollen with sleeplessness. He mouthed toward me through the glass. "Are they gone?" I didn't know, so I didn't answer. Then I noticed something that made the hairs on my arms stand straight. The vehicles weren't driving away, they were fading, literally dissolving into the morning haze like mirages losing coherence. The sedan blurred around the edges first, its outline shimmering until it simply wasn't there. The truck followed, its front dissolving into grains of light, its back evaporating last. No tire marks, no dust trail, not even heat distortion from engines that had run for hours, just an empty lot. The silence afterward pressed against my eardrums. I stepped outside for the first time all night. The air felt wrong, heavy, metallic, like breathing through a heated coin. The family hurried out of their camper, shoving gear inside as fast as they could. The father approached me, voice low. "We're getting out of here. You should do the same." Before I could answer, 2 police vehicles pulled up, local authorities responding to a call I hadn't made. They asked questions, inspected the lot, shrugged off the story like desert, hallucinations, or smuggler intimidation tactics. But one officer lingered behind after the others left. He studied the empty space where the vehicles had been. Then he said quietly, "This place has a pattern. People vanish here. Stay alert. And keep your lights on at night." I swallowed hard. "You believe me?" He didn't look at me. "I believe the desert keeps secrets, and we stopped trying to explain them years ago. That was enough." I quit the job within a week, but a week wasn't nearly enough to outrun what happened. Leaving the Mirage outpost felt like stepping out of a nightmare, except nightmares fade. This one didn't. I moved states away, found a normal job, rented a decent apartment. But even in cities full of noise, my nights stayed too quiet. The desert had found a way of living inside me. It started small, lights flickering in my hallway at exactly the same intervals as the outpost. Outages. Then my radio at work picked up static bursts at 2:48 a.m. Sharp, even on nights I wasn't anywhere near it. Sometimes I'd catch movement in store windows or reflections on passing cars, flickers of figures sitting in driver's seats, still, silent, watching. I tried convincing myself it was trauma or sleep deprivation, but denial only works until evidence piles up. The first time I saw the blinking headlights on the highway, I nearly drove off the road. 2 long flashes, one short, far behind me, small at first, then closer. I pulled over, heart racing. When I stepped out, the highway was empty. No cars in sight except the one I'd passed 10 minutes earlier, a minivan heading the opposite direction. I got back in the car and locked the doors. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Most people struggle to believe ordinary truths. They wouldn't accept something the desert had shaped out of silence and sand. But I've realized something important. The night of the vehicles wasn't a one-time event. It was an invitation, or maybe a warning. Something out there knows who sees it, and it doesn't forget. Now, whenever I drive long stretches of road at night, I fight the urge to check my mirror, but I always cave. Because sometimes, far behind me, I catch a glimpse of a sedan's headlights. 2 long flashes, one short, like the desert whispering, "You left, but you're still marked." And maybe I am. Maybe some deserts don't let their watchers go once they've been seen. Maybe I'll always be someone the night remembers. But here's the truth I've accepted. Some places aren't meant for people. Some roads follow back. And some silence is alive. When we ignore our instincts and stay in places that were never meant for us, the consequences often linger long after we leave. Trust your intuition. Some warnings are quiet, but they exist to keep you alive. Long before that night at Villa Sirena, I grew up believing fear was something you outgrew, like hand-me-down clothes or bad habits. My mom worked 2 jobs. My dad disappeared before I could spell my own name, and I learned early that nothing in life changed unless you were willing to face the uncomfortable. Maybe that's why I ended up working night shifts at a cliffside, rental home where the walls groaned like they had secrets gnawing inside them. Money was tight, rent was late, and Villa Sirena paid double after midnight. That alone was enough to make me shrug off every weird tale whispered by guests. Still, even with all my practical logic, I never shook the feeling that the place watched me. It started the third night I stayed over to cover emergency shifts. The lake outside was pitch black, like an ink spill under the moon, and the wind that came off it rattled the glass railings. I was sweeping the West Hall when I heard a rhythmic scraping beneath the floor, soft, steady, disturbingly patient. At first I froze, waiting for it to stop. When it didn't, I forced myself to breathe and said quietly, "Pipes, temperature, whatever." But I already knew the lodge was too modern for excuses like that. By 1:06 a.m., as I changed linens in the east wing, a faint breeze brushed my ankles. No, windows were open. I followed it to a built-in cabinet. One shelf was pushed out farther than the rest. I pressed on it out of curiosity. It clicked inward and slid aside like it had been waiting for me. Behind it was a narrow stone staircase disappearing into darkness. My stomach dropped. I wasn't brave, not in the way people pretend to be, but something about the scraping, now louder, now closer, made me shout down the stairs. "Hello? This is private property," my voice echoed, bouncing into what felt like hollow earth. I stepped back. The scraping stopped instantly. For a moment, the whole lodge was quiet. Too quiet. It felt like someone below was listening for my next move. I shoved the panel shut and walked fast toward the security room, my hands slick and shaking. I told myself it was all in my head, but deep down I knew I had opened something I should have left alone. Inside the security room, the monitors glowed like a wall of unblinking eyes. Most cameras showed nothing unusual: polished floors, silent hallways, still air. But then I noticed an icon blinking on the far right screen, the sub-basement heat sensor. I didn't even know we had a sub-basement. The lodge's blueprints, at least the ones I'd been shown, didn't mention one. The heat sensor pulsed red. Movement. Something alive down there. I swallowed hard and grabbed the radio. The last thing I wanted was to call the night manager and sound like a panicking rookie. But before I could speak, the radio crackled. At first it was static, a gentle hum, then a slow exhale. Human, too human. Then a whisper drifted through. "Don't close it again." I dropped the radio. It hit the floor with a hollow clatter that echoed louder than it should have. My pulse was pounding, and every instinct screamed at me to run. When I reached the main entrance and grabbed the handle, the electronic lock flashed from locked to error to locked again, like someone was tampering with it in real time. A heavy thud echoed from the east wing. The staircase. Something was climbing up. With no way out, I grabbed the nearest chair and jammed it under the door handle. Even though it was electronic, logic didn't matter anymore. I moved through the living room, killing the lights, as I went, and ducked into the storage cupboard behind the bar. I pulled the door shut just as slow, deliberate footsteps dragged across the hallway outside. They paused inches away. I clamped a hand over my mouth. My heartbeat was so loud I wondered if it could be heard through the door. Minutes felt like hours, then nothing. Just silence. I waited longer, afraid silence was a trick, afraid that the moment I moved, something would breathe against the door. But when I finally cracked it open, the footsteps were gone. The entrance light flicked on. The main door swung open on its own with a mechanical click, like someone had released it manually. I ran, straight to the porch, straight into the cold air that smelled like rain and lake water. I didn't stop until morning light scraped across the sky. Security arrived just after sunrise, uniforms sharp, faces bored. They expected a false alarm, maybe a raccoon or a malfunctioning sensor. But when they saw the panic still twisting my voice, they took things more seriously. We walked through the lodge together, checking every room, every storage space. Nothing was out of place except the linen cabinet. "Was this open when you left it?" one of them asked. "No," I said. I wanted to tell him it had been closed from the start of time and should have stayed that way, but my mouth felt too dry. They opened the hidden panel. It slid aside smoothly, like a secret well oiled over years. The staircase swallowed their flashlight beams as they descended. I waited at the top, ankles trembling, hugging myself though I didn't feel cold. One of them called up, "There's definitely a sub-basement, a whole room. How the hell did no one know about this?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to think about the implications. When they finally came up, they weren't bored anymore. In the sub-basement, they'd found a cot, crumpled blankets, empty food packets, a water bottle, and worst of all, a journal. They placed it in my hands because I'd been the one who'd heard everything first. My name wasn't written on it, but it might as well have been. Inside were pages filled with messy handwriting, scribbles of times, sketches of the hallways upstairs, and notes like, "She enters East Wing 042. She checks windows twice tonight. She heard me. She's closer." One page was written darker, ink pressed into the paper. "She found the panel. Whoever was down there had been watching me, studying me, learning my routine. Not a ghost. Not some supernatural entity. Something far more terrifying, another human being. Someone who breathed. Someone who listened." Security searched the outside grounds, the cliffside, the surrounding trees, and even part of the shoreline. No footprints, no trail, no exit. It was like the person had evaporated into the cold morning air. I knew better. He hadn't vanished. He had escaped, or he was still nearby, watching from somewhere we hadn't looked. I packed everything I owned in 30 minutes. Even though the sun was up, every shadow inside Villa Sirena felt stretched too long, like something lurked just beyond my peripheral vision. The security team didn't argue when I said I was done. One of them even offered to walk me to my car. The lake was calm, glass smooth, pretending it hadn't been witness to something monstrous just hours earlier. The lodge behind me looked perfectly ordinary again. The morning light, smoothing out its edges. You'd never know the walls held secrets. I drove into town with my jaw clenched so tight I felt my teeth ache. At a diner near the main road, I sat with a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. My hands shook so badly I spilled half of it. Every time the door opened, I turned too fast, half expecting to see someone from the sub-basement walk in. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without checking my locks 3 times, sometimes 4. The scraping sound replayed in my head at random moments when I was brushing my teeth, when I was folding laundry, when I was alone in an empty aisle at the grocery store. It wasn't just trauma. It was a constant reminder that someone had been moving in the dark, just feet beneath me, tracking me like I was a character in their private script. I left the job for good, didn't even pick up my last paycheck. But that wasn't the end of it. A month later, a letter arrived without a return address. My name on the envelope, written in the same jagged handwriting as the journal. Inside was a single sentence. "You left the panel open." I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But someone wanted me to believe I had and that they were still close enough to know. I went to the police. They filed it. They said they'd call if anything else turned up. Nothing ever did. I wish I could say that was enough to calm me down. It wasn't. Because fear doesn't leave when you close the door behind it. It hangs on. It studies. It waits. It took months for my nerves to settle. And even then, something in me stayed on edge, as if I had grown a second sense, a warning system built from that night's terror. The world felt different afterward. Rooms felt smaller. Hallways felt longer. Silence felt suspicious. I moved to a smaller place, one where I could see every corner from the front door. The first week there, I didn't unpack anything except my toothbrush and a blanket. Then one night, not long after midnight, I was brushing my hair when I heard something faint beneath the floorboards. A scrape, slow, dragging, familiar enough to freeze me instantly. I told myself it was the house settling. Old wood, temperature change. Logic tried to soothe me, the same way it had tried at Villa Sirena. But the scraping happened again, and this time it had rhythm. I dropped the brush. My breath stuttered in and out. I pulled out my phone and started recording, because proof felt like the only thing protecting my sanity. But before I pressed save, the scraping stopped completely. Like someone realized I was listening. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. The sound never returned, but the memory of it clung to me like damp air. Sometimes I wonder if trauma rewires you. If once you've been hunted, even for a moment, your brain never fully returns to the baseline you once had. Maybe the person from the sub-basement is gone forever. Maybe he found a new place to crawl into. Or maybe he's still nearby, waiting for another panel to slide open, another night when someone else tells themselves the house is just settling. But the truth is this: whenever I find myself alone at night, long after the world goes quiet, I still hear that scraping not through the floor, but inside my mind, a reminder that darkness often hides the things we don't want to believe exist, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who breathe just like we do. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Ignoring fear doesn't make danger disappear, it only gives it more time to find you. Long before that night on Highway 99, before the fog and the viaduct and the strangers who moved like shadows practicing a ritual, I used to believe the world was predictable. I believed danger was loud, obvious, the kind of thing that announced itself with shouting or sirens. Working as a sous chef in a crowded kitchen made life feel structured. You followed recipes, sharpened knives, listened to the steady rhythm of orders called out. Everything had its place, even chaos. Maybe that's why I liked driving home across the Cantal moors after midnight. The quiet felt earned, a reward. The dark never bothered me before. It was just another stretch of the evening, a blank space between work and sleep. I guess I didn't realize how easily blank spaces can be filled. For months, I'd been stuck in my own head thinking about whether I'd wasted too many years in kitchens, whether I'd ever move past being second in command, whether solitude was a choice or a habit, but I always felt safe. The moors were empty, the road straight, the old stone viaduct a predictable landmark. Nothing ever happened there, nothing ever changed. At least, that's what I told myself. That night proved how wrong I could be. It began like every other late shift. I clocked out just after midnight, half exhausted, half wired. From adrenaline, I tossed my apron in the back seat, started the engine, and told myself the moors would help me breathe again. They always did. But as I drove farther from town, something felt off in the air. The fog lay thicker than usual, almost textured, like I was driving through shredded cotton. The dashboard clock blinked 12:41 a.m. I remember blinking at it, thinking it looked strange, as if time itself was holding its breath. Ahead, the viaduct was nothing more than a shape cut out of deeper darkness. I tapped the radio. It crackled, then cut to silence. When the headlights flickered, I wasn't scared yet. Cars glitch, electronics fail, roads get cold. I told myself not to be dramatic. Then I saw the silhouette standing on top of the viaduct, and suddenly the night stopped feeling like a blank space at all. I slowed without meaning to. The car rolled forward on its own momentum as my eyes adjusted to the shapes above the arch. Two people stood motionless on the viaduct, their bodies outlined in weak moonlight. They weren't talking, they weren't leaning on the railing, they were just staring straight down at the road, facing me as if they'd been waiting. I tried to make sense of them. Maybe hikers who'd lost their way, maybe pranksters. But something in their posture felt wrong. They stood too still, too calculated, like they'd rehearsed the idea of being statues. The fog drifted around them, thinning just enough that I could see. Their rigid shoulders and heads tilted forward. My instinct whispered to speed up, but my curiosity had always been a stupid, stubborn thing, creeping forward even when logic said not to. I looked up again. One silhouette had vanished. A pulse of fear shot through me, quick and electric. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel, scanning the top of the viaduct, the sides, the road ahead. I told myself maybe they'd stepped back, maybe they'd simply moved out of sight. Maybe. The car rolled under the arch. Something dropped into the path of my headlights. A man landed in the middle of the road like he'd stepped off an invisible ledge. He didn't stumble, or crouch, or even catch his balance. He just stood upright and smiled at me. A thin, vacant expression stretched across his face. The kind of smile someone might wear if they'd forgotten how emotions work and were trying to imitate one. I rolled the window down just an inch. "Are you hurt?" He didn't blink, didn't move. His lips parted slightly, and I saw him mouth one word, "Help," but there was no urgency in it, no panic, just a hollow mimic of distress. I felt a chill crawl across my arms. Something moved in my rearview mirror. The second figure was walking toward the back of my car, slow at first, then faster, stepping out of the fog like he already knew the timing, the angles, The way panic would freeze me just long enough. The man in front of me took one step closer, and I understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone in trouble. This was a trap. The realization hit like a slap. My breath locked in my chest, my fingers tightening so hard on the wheel that the leather dug into my palms. The man in front of me lifted his hand, palm out, as if asking for calm, but something in the gesture felt rehearsed, like he didn't fully understand what calm was supposed to look like. His eyes were the worst part, wide, unblinking, empty in a way I'd only seen once before in an ICU room when my uncle drifted between consciousness and nowhere. I shoved the gear into reverse. The man lunged forward, his hand slapping my hood so hard the car shook. A streak of grime dragged beneath his palm, dark and oily like something scraped from the underside of a bridge. I jerked back instinctively, heart hammering against my ribs. The second figure broke into a sprint behind me. Both of them moved like people who had practiced running in shadows. My tires screeched against wet asphalt. The car fishtailed, skidding slightly before it, straightened out. I didn't dare look away from the rearview mirror. Not when the second figure was gaining, his arms pumping, something metallic glinting at his side. A knife. Or maybe a crowbar. I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to. The fog swallowed the sound of everything except my engine and my heartbeat. I slammed the accelerator, driving backward under the viaduct, every nerve in me screaming. The smiling man tried to chase, but the car had too much momentum. His face twisted not in pain or anger, but in some eerie, rehearsed attempt at expression, like he was trying to imitate frustration but didn't know how. For several long seconds they chased me, their silhouettes weaving through the fog, their feet pounding the wet pavement. The metallic glint flashed again, closer this time. I jerked the wheel, narrowly missing a slab of broken concrete at the roadside. Then my tires hit open road. Both figures stopped instantly. Just stopped. They stood there at the edge of the viaduct's shadow, watching me speed away. No shouting, no running, just silent, perfect stillness. Their silhouettes grew smaller in my mirror, then dissolved into the fog behind me. I didn't slow down, not even when the fog thinned, not even when the first streetlight appeared. Miles later, like a lighthouse, only when I pulled into a gas station lit like a sanctuary did I let myself breathe again. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights felt almost holy. They buzzed softly, washing the aisles in an artificial clarity that made the world feel real again. I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my hands from shaking as the attendant, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes and a jaw that looked permanently clenched, studied my face like he'd already seen this kind of panic before. "You all right?" he asked. "Something happened under the viaduct," I said, voice unsteady. "Two people. I cut myself off." Unsure how much would sound insane, he exhaled long and slow. "You're the third one this month." My skin prickled. "Third? Who saw what?" "Figures. At night. Always the viaduct." His voice dropped to a murmur. "Always around the same time." He didn't say more, and I didn't push him. I didn't want details. Not then. Details would make it too real. When the police arrived, I expected disbelief. I expected their eyes to narrow, their tone to shift toward pity or suspicion. But they didn't dismiss me. They just listened, took notes, and drove out to investigate. I sat in the station's plastic chair, listening to the hum of vending machines and the occasional passing truck, waiting for them to come back with some reasonable explanation. They returned an hour later. "Someone's been there," the officer said. "But whoever they are, they're gone." They'd found footprints in the mud, drag marks, cigarette butts, a torn piece of dark fabric, hooked on a snag of stone, enough to show someone had been under the viaduct recently, enough to suggest planning, watching, waiting, but no one was found. No abandoned cars, no camps, no tools, nothing. One officer suggested thrill seekers, another said opportunistic criminals, but neither theory felt right. People who set traps usually leave signs of intention. People who live outside the law leave traces of lives, trash, bottles, footprints, leading somewhere. These traces led nowhere. When I finally walked back to my car, the grime streak from the man's palm was still there. A perfect arc across the hood. I almost reached out to touch it, then stopped myself. I didn't want to know if it felt like something other than dirt. I changed my route home permanently, and I told myself that was enough. But the truth is, some fears stay in the bloodstream long after the danger is gone. Even now, months later, when I drive under any bridge at night, doesn't matter how new, how bright, how populated, I feel that same pressure building in my chest. My eyes drift upward before I can stop them, searching the railing for silhouettes that shouldn't be there. I tell myself, it's irrational. I tell myself it's just trauma replaying itself. But fear doesn't care about logic. I still remember the way the man's smile never reached his eyes, the way the second figure ran, without hesitation, as if he knew exactly how I'd react, the way they stopped the moment the road opened up, like there was an invisible boundary they couldn't cross. Sometimes I wonder how many nights they stood up there practicing, watching headlights crawl across the moor until they found the right car, the right moment, the right person, alone enough not to be missed quickly. I never called the station again to ask if anyone else reported sightings. I didn't want to know the answer. Knowing would only prove the world was far stranger and far more dangerous than I ever allowed myself to believe. But I did learn something from that night, something I carry with me every time I cook, every time I drive home in the dark, every time I catch myself drifting into autopilot and forgetting how vulnerable we really are. The world isn't predictable. Danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits quietly in familiar places, under old stone arches, rehearsing itself in the dark, until the moment it steps into your headlights. And if there's any lesson in what happened to me, it's this: remain aware, trust your instincts, and never assume silence means safety. Even the most familiar roads can hide unseen dangers, and ignoring your instincts can lead you straight into harm. Awareness isn't fear, it's survival. People say every place carries a memory, but hotels carry thousands. I learned that long before I ever stepped inside the Hotel des Roses Noires. Growing up, I used to trail behind my mother as she cleaned rooms in roadside motels. She'd tell me that hotels had two souls: the bright, daytime soul that welcomed strangers, and the nighttime soul that revealed what those strangers left behind: fears, grief, secrets. Maybe that's why I never feared the night shift. I assumed the dark simply told the truth. The Hotel des Roses Noires sat on a quiet European coast, tucked between a cliffside and an aging pier. Once a glamorous destination for artists and wealthy travelers, it now hung on mostly because of its charm and the fact that it was cheaper than the newer hotels downtown. When I applied for the desk clerk job, the manager smiled too quickly and hired me too fast. I figured they were desperate. I didn't know they were also short-staffed because people didn't last long. On nights, my first 3 weeks were uneventful. Slow winter nights, sleepy guests, old chandeliers, flickering like they had asthma. I spent the hours making coffee that tasted like cardboard and reading paperbacks left behind by guests. Other clerks teased me gently. "Don't fall asleep on the 4th floor," one said. "Why?" I joked. "Ghosts?" The older clerk, Luke, didn't laugh. "Just don't linger there at night." I assumed it was hazing. Older buildings make noises, people exaggerate, but a pinprick of curiosity stayed with me, like a splinter under the skin. On the night everything changed, I was covering for a sick colleague. I'd been awake since early morning, barely holding myself together with caffeine and duty. Past 3 a.m., the hotel felt like it had inhaled and never exhaled. The air had weight. Even the lobby plants seemed to lean away from the shadowy stairs leading up. I told myself to shake it off, restock towels, check camera feeds, stay awake. Routine meant safety, and I craved safety that night without understanding why. Before heading upstairs, I glanced at the clock. 3:06 a.m., 2 minutes before the time I would come to fear more than any other. The 4th floor was the quietest level in the whole building. Half the rooms were closed for renovations. At least that's what the sign said, though I never once saw contractors. The carpet there felt thicker, the air more stale, like no one had walked it in years. I pushed the linen cart forward, its squeaky wheel echoing far louder than it should have. "Just restock and leave," I whispered to myself. Talking out loud made me feel less alone, even if I knew it was a flimsy comfort. The hallway lights flickered softly, not fully malfunctioning, but acting like they were tired of shining. I was loading towels into the cupboard when I felt at the pressure of someone standing right Behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just presence. A tall presence. My spine stiffened. I turned around quickly, half annoyed, half startled. No one stood there. But down the stretch of hallway, swallowed partly by shadow, stood a silhouette. Thin, taller than any man I'd seen. Utterly still. Too still. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Are you lost?" It didn't respond, didn't shift, didn't breathe. Its outline seemed wrong, like a stretched shadow, awkwardly pinned to the wrong place. Then it pivoted. Not walked, pivoted. Smoothly, almost mechanically, and it glided its feet, clearing the floor by inches toward room 407. I blinked, waiting for the illusion to break. But it didn't. The figure slipped into the room and vanished. My rational brain fought hard to save me. Hallway distortion, sleep deprivation, a tall guest, nothing more. But curiosity pushed me forward, even as fear tried to anchor me to the carpet. Room 407's door was slightly ajar. That alone was odd. Our doors locked automatically. I nudged it open with my fingertips, murmuring, "Housekeeping." Just checking. The room felt different the moment I stepped inside. Colder, as if someone had removed all warmth with a vacuum. The curtains swayed though the windows were shut. A ripple of dread crawled down my arms, then the door slammed behind me with violent force. I spun around and grabbed the handle. It was locked. From the outside, my voice shook. "Hey, open up." No answer. Only the rapid pattering of footsteps in the hallway, quick, too quick, stopping right at the door. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. No breath. No movement. Just the suffocating silence of something waiting. Panic doesn't rise gradually. It strikes like a match. One moment I was listening to silence on the other side of the door. The next, my heart was thundering so loudly I could barely hear myself. Think. I yanked at the handle again. "Who's there? Stop messing around." But the tremble in my voice betrayed me. I wasn't scolding someone. I was pleading with something. Footsteps resumed in the hallway light, fast and circling back and forth. Then they stopped, abruptly, right behind the door again, like the figure was deciding whether to come in. My breath hitched. "Please, don't." I pressed my forehead against the cool wood, hoping to hear human breathing, shuffling, anything normal. But the other side was still. Too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then came the click, soft, precise. The lock turned by itself. I didn't question it. I didn't test it. I threw the door open and ran. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, lights dimming in slow, irregular pulses. I didn't look back. My slippers slapped against the carpet as I darted toward the stairwell, gripping the rail so tightly that metal ridges imprinted into my palms. When I reached the lobby, the brightness hit me like oxygen. My lungs felt raw from gasping. The night was still empty, the desk still abandoned, the clock still ticking past 3 a.m. Nothing looked different, but everything felt different. I rushed behind the desk and opened the security camera feed. My fingers shook over the keyboard. Camera 4A, the fourth floor hallway. At 3:05 a.m., a tall, dark shape entered the frame, taller than the door frames. Its movements were smooth, unnatural. Its feet hovered above the floor like there was an invisible surface beneath it. It glided toward room 407. I swallowed hard and scrubbed the timeline forward. 3:07 a.m. It slipped into the room. 3:08 a.m. The moment I had been inside. The camera showed the tall figure standing directly at the door, its head tilted, listening to me. A cold wave spread through me. I watched as the figure slowly turned toward the camera. Its face was featureless. And then, mid-step, it vanished. No fade, no distortion, simply gone. I backed away from the monitor, my shoulder hitting the wall. For a moment, I wondered if I had hallucinated the entire night. Then the elevator dinged, and the fourth floor button lit up by itself. I called security with a voice that barely obeyed me. "Fourth floor. Possible intruder. Please, come now." The guard on duty, Mateo, arrived within minutes, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Clara, slow down. What happened?" I replayed the footage for him. He stared, squinting, jaw clenching. "Could be some error. A shadow glitch." "It wasn't a glitch," I said, too quickly. "I saw it. It locked me in 407. Mateo looked unsettled but forced a nod. Let's check it out. He insisted I stay in the lobby, but I refused. I needed to prove to myself that something physical, something explainable, awaited us upstairs, so we went together. The elevator hummed upward like it was climbing into a colder world. When the doors slid open, the hallway was empty again. Still, lifeless. My chest tightened. Mateo tried the handle of room 407. It opened easily. The room was undisturbed bedsheets, crisp, lamps off, air cold, but not unnaturally so. No sign of forced entry, he said. Nobody here. I paced the room, drawn toward the spot where I'd stood earlier. It was occupied. Someone was here. He checked his handheld device. Keycard log shows no entries for this room the last 5 days. That's impossible. Mateo lifted the mattress, opened the closet, checked under the bed. Nothing. Not even dust. Disturbed. He exhaled slowly. Clara. Old buildings play tricks at night. Shadows. Angles. Fatigue. Don't. My voice cracked. Look at the footage again if you don't believe me. Footage can glitch. I stared at him, feeling heat behind my eyes. I'm not crazy, he sighed, softer this time. I know you're not, but there's nothing to report. The elevator ride back down felt endless. My legs were heavy, as though the hallway had drained something from me, some vital thread of certainty I'd always relied on. When we reached the lobby, Mateo filled out a routine incident report, nothing more. He didn't look at me when he left. The hotel fell silent again, deeper than before, like the building had swallowed even the small noises that made it feel alive. I sat behind the desk until sunrise, unable to move, replaying the moment the figure's head tilted toward the door as if listening to my heartbeat. At 7 a.m., when the day clerk arrived, I told her I quit. No explanation, no notice, but I didn't sleep that morning. I couldn't, because every time I closed my eyes, I felt someone standing behind me again, tall, cold, silent, waiting. I left Hotel des Roses Noires hours after the sun rose, carrying nothing but my coat and purse. The wind coming off the water tasted like salt and old iron. I promised myself I would never set foot in that place again, and I've kept that promise, mostly. Life afterward wasn't simple. People think fear fades with distance, but some fears travel well. I moved to a different city, found work in a smaller, newer hotel. One with automatic lights and bright hallways and security staff who didn't disappear into break rooms at night. I told myself, the past was behind me, but the past has a way of checking in without a reservation. The first time it happened, I was restocking toiletries in a guest bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed, flickered, and steadied. Harmless, I told myself, just faulty wiring. Then I felt it, that familiar pressure behind me. Like someone tall stood too close. I turned instantly. No one. Just my reflection in the mirror, pale and tense, staring back at me. I tried to laugh it off. But that night, during my break, something pushed the feeling deeper into my bones. I was sitting in the staff lounge when the motion-activated hallway light flicked on. I leaned forward, expecting a coworker to appear. The hallway stayed empty. The light turned off, then on again, then off. I stood frozen. Eventually, I forced myself to step into the hallway. The air felt thicker there, colder. At the far end, a shadow stretched across the floor longer than a human shadow should be. It shifted slightly, as if someone tall had just moved out of sight. I didn't wait to confirm it. Since then, the moments come and go. A soft click of a door behind me at exactly the same time each night, 3:08 a.m. A mirror reflecting a ripple in the doorway behind me. A distant sound of footsteps that stop when I listen harder. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's imagination carving patterns into silence. Or maybe the tall figure didn't stay in room 407. Maybe it followed me. All I know is that whenever I'm alone in a quiet hallway, no matter the hotel, no matter the city, my skin prickles at the same angle on my back, as if something stands there, silent. Some doors are closed for a reason. Curiosity may lead us forward, but wisdom reminds us to step back when something feels wrong. Trust your instincts, they often sense danger long before the mind accepts it. I've spent more nights behind the wheel than in a bed, 34 years, and I've been driving through deserts, mountain passes, and lonely highways since I was 21. I courier. Documents that no one else will touch, legal papers, sensitive contracts, even rare blueprints. Most people assume it's exciting work. The truth? It's monotonous, punctuated by sudden moments of dread. You learn to read the desert like a second language, the curve of a canyon, the way the wind bends the scrub brush, the distant hum of a coyote calling. That night started like most others. The Chihuahuan desert stretched around me, dark and merciless. My van's dashboard clock read 1:53 a.m., the kind of hour where time bends and your brain tries to convince you that stopping for an hour of sleep is harmless. I spotted an old rest area, cracked concrete, and fading signs. It seemed safe enough, or at least as safe as a place forgotten by everyone else. I parked close to the cliff edge, reinforced locks engaged, tinted windows down only enough to breathe in the cold night air. I set my camera feed to monitor the lot, told myself I'd nap for 1 hour, just an hour. But the desert isn't quiet. It listens. The wind carried 1,000 tiny echoes, rattling the van and whispering warnings that I wasn't ready to hear. I tried to ignore it. Sleep is a stubborn necessity when your next delivery waits for sunrise, and exhaustion can make even the careful careless. By 2:17, I was only halfway into that shallow sleep when the first vibration hit the van's door. A single tap, then another. My heart thudded in my throat. I froze, listening. My camera monitor flickered, and I crawled forward to see the shadowed figures emerging from a camper van, parked silently beside me. No headlights, no sound beyond the scrape of boots on gravel. 3 silhouettes moved with precision, like predators who had been practicing this ritual for years. The lead figure tapped my reinforced door, whispering just loud enough to reach my ears. This one's reinforced. But everything has a weak point. My blood ran cold. This wasn't random trespassers, it was calculated. They had targeted me. I thought about my options in that moment, none of them good. The van was built for security, reinforced doors, thick metal walls, even a hidden camera system. But it wasn't a fortress, and these people weren't amateurs. They circled, inspecting vents, crouching near tires, reading every tiny sound my breathing made. One crouched near the front tire, head tilted, as if trying to predict my next move. I could see their intent, patience, observation. They weren't going to make noise until they knew exactly what they were dealing with. I gripped the steering wheel, silent, heart hammering like a jackhammer. My van offered a false sense of comfort, and I clung to it. I turned the key, quietly, intending to slip out slowly. Maybe they wouldn't notice. Maybe I could vanish into the desert, night before they realized. But instinct is faster than planning. The moment the engine clicked, heads snapped toward me, silhouettes rigid, eyes fixed. Panic surged. They moved like shadows, sudden and fluid. One slammed a palm against the window, leaving a smeared imprint. Another grabbed the roof rack, clinging like a wild animal. I floored the gas. The van lurched backward, knocking the clinging figure off balance, and I swerved sharply to avoid the canyon edge. My tires dug into loose gravel, sending sparks into the blackness. Behind me, the camper van roared to life. I could hear the engine vibrating. Through the night, they weren't giving up, not yet. The chase became a blur of curves, rocks, and the constant fear that one wrong turn would send me plummeting into the abyss. My mind raced. Every second was a calculation. Speed, distance, escape routes. I realized the desert was no longer a silent companion. It had turned into an arena, and I was its prey. The van behind me mirrored every turn, every acceleration, a ghostly predator refusing to let go. I remembered stories I'd heard on radio dispatch, travelers disappearing, never to be seen again. My stomach twisted. They weren't improvising. They had done this before. Every nerve in my body screamed. My hands were slick on the wheel, adrenaline hammering in my veins. I swerved over gravel, narrowly missing boulders that had been thrown loose over time. One moment, I was fighting the van's weight on a sharp curve, and the next, the pursuit seemed impossibly close, the camper van hugging the lines like a predator honing in. I shouted at the empty road, not out of hope, but to release the tension that had built to a breaking point. Come on, damn it, move faster. My voice echoed against canyon walls. Behind me, a muffled engine roar answered. The shadows were relentless. My van's reinforced body groaned under the pressure, tires screaming against asphalt and rock alike. Then, something changed. The camper van slowed slightly, hung back at a distance that still made my heart jump. They weren't giving up entirely, they were waiting, circling, strategizing. I realized they weren't after me alone. They wanted control, dominance, fear. And the moment I let my guard down, they would strike again. I plotted my next move while pretending to be unaware of their strategy. A sudden cut into a side canyon, a misdirection, a calculation based on years of desert experience. Loose gravel gave my tires traction I didn't expect. The van lurched over uneven ground, and in a heartbeat, I had gained precious distance. The desert night stretched endlessly. Stars above were distant witnesses, indifferent to the clang, mortal games unfolding below. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the camper van parked, mid-road, engines idling, watching. Their patience unnerved me as much as their aggression. The realization hit this wasn't a fight that could be won with speed alone. It was about outlasting, surviving, and never trusting the silence again. By the time I reached the next highway station, my body trembled with exhaustion. Officers listened as I recounted the entire ordeal. Their silence was heavy, loaded with knowledge I wasn't privy to. One officer spoke softly. "There's a group out here. No base, no names. They target travelers who stop alone. People go missing." The other added, "You weren't their first stop tonight." I swallowed hard. The thought that countless others might have faced them and never returned was suffocating. I reported everything, filled out forms, gave statements. But even as I drove away, the desert seemed changed, alive with unseen watchers. Every shadow, every sudden wind gust felt like a reminder of that night. Sleep became harder, stops became calculated, always in well-lit areas, surrounded by people. My routes changed permanently, avoiding isolated roads, avoiding temptation. The van, once my cocoon, became a mobile reminder of vulnerability. Months passed, but the memory never left me. Every nighttime drive is a tension, a test of awareness. Every stop is measured. I tell this story not to scare, but to remind. Vigilance matters. People often underestimate danger because it's invisible, patient, and adaptable. The desert teaches harsh lessons about respect, preparation, and the thin line between carelessness and catastrophe. I've learned the hard way that solitude can be deadly, and trust must be earned, not assumed. The Chihuahuan Desert has its predators, not just animals, but people who thrive on fear and opportunity. Survival isn't just about speed or strength, it's about awareness, intuition, and never ignoring the small signs that whisper danger long before it's at your door. Now, when I see headlights on a quiet highway, I feel a shiver. But instead of panic, there's readiness, awareness, respect, and the knowledge that some lessons are learned in miles, not classrooms. Moral: danger often comes silently and unpredictably, but vigilance, preparation, and respect for your surroundings are the true shields against unseen threats. I'd always thought of myself as cautious, a woman of science who measured every risk before stepping into the wild. As a wildlife biologist, late-night field shifts were normal. But the drive back through the Colorado backwoods always carried a quiet unease I could never shake. That night, my truck's headlights carved a narrow path through the pine-dark forest. The mountain road stretched before me like a pale ribbon, winding and empty. There were no lights, no passing vehicles, not even the hum of insects. My only company was the low drone of the engine and the occasional snap of a branch under a raccoon's cautious steps. I checked the clock, 12:41 a.m. I had finished cataloging a wolf tracking station and had wanted nothing more than my bed. But the shortcut through the pass saved an hour, and I liked the solitude even if it sometimes made my imagination run wild. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated something impossible, a perfectly round depression in the asphalt, larger than any pothole. Edges smooth, almost polished, I slammed the brakes, heart lurching. The tires skidded slightly on the cold asphalt, and I grabbed my flashlight. The forest seemed absent. No wind, no insects, not even the quiet creak of pines settling in the night. Only a faint hum, deep and rhythmic, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I crouched at the edge, shining the light closer. The ground pulsed beneath me, not visibly, but through that subtle, unnatural vibration. My radio, which had been dead for hours, crackled with a faint voice, fragmented and desperate. "Don't stop, don't stand on it." I froze, a shiver crawling down my spine. The hum deepened, pressing against my chest. Something was watching, but not from above, from below. Then, a snap, a twig behind me. I spun. The trees I had passed tall, straight pines leaned, subtly, unnaturally, toward the depression. Their trunks arched as if gravity had shifted for them. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Frost heave, animal burrow, but nothing fit, nothing could. I took a single step back, and the ground trembled underfoot. Just slightly, but enough to send a jolt through my body. My pulse raced, and that's when I realized I couldn't linger here. Not another second. I jumped into the truck and slammed the door, fumbling for the keys. The hum followed me, faint, now but insistent, vibrating through the chassis. I could feel it through the steering wheel, through the seat, a heartbeat that didn't belong to the night. I tore down the road, eyes darting to the mirrors and headlights, but the depression didn't reappear, at least, not immediately. I tried calling the ranger station. Nothing. Cell service was gone, and I knew it wouldn't return, until I crested the next ridge. My rational side whispered, sinkholes happen, natural causes, probably a maintenance issue, but every instinct screamed otherwise. The depression had a presence, a weight, something that should not exist. A few miles down, I stopped, breathing hard, trying to calm my racing heart. The air felt normal again. Whined through the pines, insects chirping, snow crunching beneath my boots as I stepped out to stretch. But the memory lingered. That hum, that pulse beneath my feet, the way the trees had leaned. The next morning, I reported it to the local ranger. His eyes narrowed as I described the exact location. "You sure you got the time right?" he asked. I was sure. He shook his head. "We've patched that stretch 4 times this year. Every time it sinks, no one knows why." Curiosity gnawed at me. That afternoon, I drove back, this time in daylight, scanning the forest, floor and the asphalt for clues. Nothing. Not a crack, not a depression, nothing. Even the leaning trees had straightened. The earth looked normal, innocent, but I knew better. I thought about it for days, replaying the hum in my mind, the vibration through my boots, the way the depression seemed to breathe. And then came a strange realization. The earth wasn't just unstable. It was selective, observant, alive in ways I couldn't quantify. Science couldn't touch it, and that terrified me more than any predator in the wild. That night, I swore I would never drive that pass after dark again, and for weeks, I avoided thinking about it. Until one evening, during another late-night field shift, I saw the hum in my mind's eye, not a sound this time, a presence, watching, remembering, waiting. Weeks passed. I buried myself in work, tracking wildlife populations, recording data, calibrating cameras. Yet the memory of the depression haunted me. My colleagues laughed when I mentioned it, attributing my fear to exhaustion. But I knew exhaustion had nothing to do with it. It wasn't hallucination. The earth had responded. Something had moved beneath it. One evening, I decided to return, just past dusk, driving slowly. My headlights traced the familiar curves, and the air thickened, cool and damp. I passed the spot. The road appeared perfectly smooth, no dip, no pulse, nothing. I parked a few yards away and stepped out, scanning with my flashlight. The forest seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. Then the ground beneath me shifted slightly. I froze. It wasn't enough to fall, just a subtle ripple, like a skin stretched over something vast. My heart leapt. I whispered into the dark, "Is anyone there?" No reply. only the subtle vibration. I remembered the radio's warning and took a step back. The hum deepened, spreading through my legs, then rising to my chest. The trees leaned ever so slightly toward me, not dramatically, just enough to make me uneasy. A rational explanation could not exist. I felt like an intruder, standing on top of something ancient, something aware. I realized then, whatever this was, it was not malevolent in a traditional sense. It didn't hate me, it was simply asserting itself. The world beneath our feet, the land we traverse, has a memory, a will. The earth remembers those who disturb it, even unintentionally. I left without another word, driving cautiously, eyes glued to the road. That night I slept with nightmares of the pulsing asphalt and the curving pines. But there was also a strange sense of awe. The earth was alive, silent, indifferent, but aware, and I was a mere visitor. Months later, the memory returned not with terror, but curiosity. I pored over geological surveys and old reports. The area had a history of minor collapses, but nothing explained the perfectly circular depression or the pulsing vibration. Theories ranged from underground water shifts to unrecorded mining tunnels. None fit. My scientific mind rejected mysticism, but even I had to admit there was something here that defied explanation. During another field expedition, a colleague joked about ghost stories. Maybe the earth doesn't like being watched, she said. I laughed, but in the back of my mind, I considered it. What if it wasn't ghosts? What if it was the land itself, alive in a way humans rarely perceive? That night, I drove home cautiously. Passing the old stretch, I slowed, eyes on the asphalt. It remained smooth, innocent, silent. But the instinct was still there. The memory of the hum, the lean of the trees. I felt the earth beneath my tires as if it had a pulse. Respect, I realized, was mandatory. Not fear, not awe, but respect. Years passed. I never drove that pass at night again. The story of the hinterland sink became my private lesson in humility. The wilderness teaches us to measure our steps, to consider that the world we walk upon is older, wiser, and more observant than we can ever comprehend. I returned to research with a renewed respect for the land, never again underestimating what lies beneath the surface. I sometimes wonder if that night left a mark on me. Perhaps it did. The world is not ours to control. We are visitors, fleeting observers on a living stage, and some things, like the hinterland sink, exist to remind us of our place. Moral: the earth is alive in ways we cannot always understand. Respect what lies beneath, tread carefully, and remember that curiosity without humility can awaken forces beyond human comprehension. Highway 47 was quiet that night, quieter than usual, if such a thing were possible. I'd driven this stretch countless times, hauling goods between Reno and Vegas, and normally, the desert, at 3 a.m., was just a blur of black sky and faint yellow lines. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavier, the hum of the truck engine somehow sharper. My name's Darren Cole, 38, trucker by trade, and I've seen a lot on the road, but I had no idea what I was about to see. The first time I noticed it, I barely registered the road sign. Exit 19 Lone Spur. My eyes flicked over it and then back to the road. I'd passed that exit hundreds of times. Maybe it was just a trick of the headlights. But then, 10 minutes later, the same sign appeared. Same words, same reflective paint, but somehow dimmer. I checked my mirrors. No other cars. No lights. Nothing but the desert stretching endlessly. I muttered to myself, tapping the dashboard. Okay, Cole, chill. Maybe it's just fatigue. But the GPS didn't help. It froze on the same 2-mile stretch, flickered like a dying screen, and reset. I fiddled with the radio. Just static. Then, buried beneath the hiss, a whisper. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Yeah, right. I'm hallucinating now. But the exit ahead was different this time. The yellow lines weren't straight, they curved, unnaturally. Guardrails bent inward, forming a narrow funnel. The sign had changed too. Exit 19 last SPUR. I'd never seen it. My hands tightened on the wheel. A figure stood beneath it, not moving, not waving, just standing. Its shadow stretched toward me, long and impossibly dark. My stomach dropped. I pressed the accelerator, trying to tell myself it was just a roadside statue or some drunken driver. But the air seemed to thicken as I passed. I glanced at the clock. 3:02 a.m. My fuel gauge hadn't moved. The odometer didn't budge. Everything repeated. The same cracked asphalt, dead tree, lone billboard. Every time I thought I was past it, it appeared again. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The repetition became suffocating. Every time I blinked, the same landscape appeared, like the desert itself had pressed the repeat button. I tried to turn the wheel, thinking maybe I could take another road, but it led me right back. The exit ramp appeared again, and again, the figure, under the sign. I took a deep breath, talking to myself like a man trying to reason with a nightmare. This isn't real, it's just fatigue. You're tired. My voice sounded thin and high in the enclosed cab. I reached for the CB radio, hoping for a connection. Anything. Static. Then, a faint female whisper. If you're hearing this, you're already inside it. I froze. My grip on the wheel tightened until my knuckles were white. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to turn, to flee, but the truck didn't respond the way it should. The accelerator pressed into the floor, but the numbers on the dash didn't climb. I was trapped in some warped stretch of asphalt. Then the exit appeared again. The figure hadn't moved, but its shadow stretched impossibly, long, pooling across the pavement. I forced myself to look at it directly, my heart hammering. There was a smile, calm, patient, and utterly alien. The kind of smile that knows exactly what you fear. I swerved violently, trying to leave, but the road warped beneath me, curves bending in, impossible angles. It was like driving inside a funhouse mirror designed by a madman. I realized then that this wasn't about speed. It wasn't about escape in the conventional sense. The road itself was the trap. I tried the radio again. The whisper returned. Don't stop. You can't stop. My throat went dry. I felt my pulse in my temples. I remembered my own words from a few hours earlier. You're hallucinating. But no hallucination could bend geometry, could replay time, could stretch a shadow that shouldn't exist. Hours or maybe minutes passed. The monotony of the loop was absolute, and still, the exit waited. Like a predator, patient. I realized something frightening. Stopping would mean surrender. And the figure, it was waiting for me to give up. Finally, exhaustion pushed me to the edge. My eyes burned, my hands shook. I considered sleeping, resting, anything, but the whispers would not allow it. Don't stop. I laughed bitterly. At that, maybe it wasn't a command, it was a trap. I forced myself to speak aloud, to remind myself I was still Darren Cole, a man who had driven through blizzards, desert storms, and near collisions. I am getting out of this. I am not stopping. My voice cracked. The shadows didn't answer. They only stretched longer. The exit ramp came again. The lines twisted. The guardrails bent inward, narrowing the path, like fingers ready to close. I could see it clearer now. The figure's silhouette, the impossible way. Its shadow clung to the road beneath me. Every instinct screamed to reverse, but the truck's engine rumbled as if laughing. I tried to talk to the figure, a desperate measure. Who? What are you? My words hung in the rent. Night, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The smile widened. I felt a cold seep into my bones. Then, a strange sensation. The road ahead stretched endlessly. Every landmark repeated the same billboard, the same dead tree, the same cracked asphalt. I realized my mind could map the area, but my body could not escape it. It was like being inside a circuit, a loop with no exit. I tried calculating distance, fuel, speed, nothing. The numbers refused to change. My heart pounded. I felt panic rising, a tide threatening to drown me. And then the whisper returned, soft but urgent. You can't fight it. You have to go back. You have to keep moving. I realized with a shiver. Movement was survival. Stopping was death or worse. I gripped the wheel tighter. The night stretched infinitely, and still, the figure waited, patient and smiling, like a teacher grading a student's mistake. I understood then. The desert wasn't empty. It was alive, testing me, bending time, twisting space, and measuring my resolve. I drove for what felt like eternity, my mind teetering on the edge of sanity. Every repeated sign, every warped line in the asphalt, became a meditation on survival. I stopped thinking in hours or minutes. I only counted the exits. Exit, exit, exit. Each one was the same, and yet different. The whispering voice became a guide, almost comforting in its persistence. Don't stop. Don't think. Just move. I obeyed, even as fatigue turned my vision blurry, my thoughts jagged. The figure appeared at intervals, always smiling, always silent. Its shadow mocked the natural laws. My truck, my only lifeline, felt heavier, as if gravity itself had warped. Then, as dawn began brushing the horizon with pale light, something changed. The repetition faltered. The exit signs flickered and blurred. The odometer began ticking. The fuel gauge moved. The world snapped. I was no longer inside the loop. I exhaled, shaking, my legs cramped, my body trembling. For the first time, I allowed myself to stop at a roadside diner, sunlight breaking across the desert. I ordered coffee and stared out at the highway. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, but my stomach knew the truth. I had glimpsed a geometry that did not belong in the human world. The dashcam footage later told the story: no figure, no shadows, only the repeated exit signs, fading like ghosts. I could feel it, though, in my bones. The road wanted me back. The smile lingered in my mind, patient and expectant. I tell this story not because I think anyone will believe it, but because someone should. I survived, and survival is a lesson I carry. The desert highway is just asphalt and sand, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it is something more, something that waits for the weary, the curious, or the careless. I learned that fear is not just instinct, it's a guide. And persistence, odd as it sounds, can save you from things far worse than death. The exit that wouldn't end taught me patience, vigilance, and the unshakable truth that some roads are traps not for the body, but for the mind. The moral? Keep moving, even when the path seems endless. Sometimes, stopping is the real danger. Trust your instincts, respect the unknown, and never assume the world follows the rules. You know, the desert doesn't forgive mistakes, and some exits, as will never let you go. I had always preferred working nights. The quiet hum of my laptop, the steady glow of the monitor, and the occasional hiss of the radiator were my companions. But that evening, something about the fog rolling over the Oslo docklands made the air feel heavier, almost viscous. It clung to the long windows of my 9th-floor apartment, spreading over the streets, below like a slow-moving river of gray. By the time the clock struck 1:47 a.m., the world outside had dissolved into a misty, suffocating blur, and the usual comfort of my apartment felt different. I tried to focus on my code, debugging a persistent issue for a client in Copenhagen, but then I heard a soft, irregular tapping behind the radiator. At first, I told myself it was pipes. The building was old. I'd heard that sound before, but this wasn't pipes. It was deliberate, uneven, almost like Morse code. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a longer pause. My stomach twisted. I paused my music and leaned closer, straining to listen. The tapping didn't stop. And then, a whisper carried through the vents, a voice hoarse and strained. "Don't turn around." I froze. Alone. No neighbors on either side. The units were being renovated. My pulse kicked in, hammering against my ribcage. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. But the whisper came again, louder this time, right in my ear. "He's right behind you." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Instead, I grabbed my phone and turned on the front camera, holding it like a mirror. My living room appeared: table, couch, open blinds, but in the far corner, a dark, crouched silhouette blurred against the camera's lens. I spun around, empty. When I looked back at the phone, it had moved, closer, directly behind where I'd been sitting, seconds ago. My fingers trembled. Panic flooded me like icy water. I bolted for the door, clutching my phone as the tapping erupted into frantic pounding from inside the walls. The hallway outside was dead silent, thick with the fog somehow seeping indoors. Even the elevator doors stayed stubbornly shut, glowing faintly, as though mocking my terror. The building had always been quiet at night, almost unnervingly so. But now, it felt alive, watching me, breathing around me. I pressed the stairs button, unsure why, since the elevator wouldn't move. My mind screamed at me to leave, to escape, yet a part of me wanted to understand what the hell was happening. With each step down, the tapping intensified, echoing through the walls like a drumbeat of some unseen predator. I could hear it climbing, scraping, relentless. My phone vibrated violently in my hand. I checked it voicemail, from my own number. I played it, hands shaking, a slow, dragging breath, and then my own voice whispered. You didn't turn around, but it followed. My legs gave out for a moment. Cold sweat streaked down my back as I forced myself to keep moving. 9 flights of stairs, 9 floors of relentless, fog-choked silence outside, and in my mind, a growing certainty that something had been waiting for me all along. I remembered the renovations in the neighboring units, empty walls, no footprints, no furniture. Yet that tapping, those scratches, the building suddenly felt like a cage with invisible bars, the fog outside a mirror of the panic closing in around me. Every creak of the floorboard sounded, amplified. Every whisper of the wind felt like a message meant for me. Finally, I reached the street. The fog enveloped me like a shroud, damp and cold against my skin. I didn't look back. My apartment, my things, my work, all of it, suddenly meaningless in the face of what I had just encountered. The night swallowed me, footsteps echoing through empty streets as though I were being followed by the very sound of fear itself. Sleep didn't come that night or the nights after. I stayed in a cheap hostel on the outskirts of the city, staring at the walls, expecting the whisper, the tap, the shadow. Friends called, worried, but I couldn't tell them. How could I explain the inexplicable? I found myself obsessively thinking about that silhouette in the corner of my living room. Its shape had been impossible to focus on, like the camera itself refused to acknowledge it fully, and yet, I had seen it. I had felt its proximity, the way it closed distance without moving in any conventional sense. It was patient, and it was deliberate. Police eventually investigated my apartment. They found the scratches, deep and parallel, behind the radiator. Nothing more. No signs of entry, no other footprints. It was as if whatever had made them had vanished into the walls themselves. I realized then that the apartment had always felt wrong, a subtle dissonance I had ignored. The cold corners, the way the fog seemed to seep in past the windows, the faint sounds that didn't quite fit. I had brushed them off, thinking it was stress, isolation, the product of long nights alone, but it wasn't. Even now, I remember that whisper, the way it used my own voice against me, turning familiarity into terror. It had followed me out of that apartment, in memory and in panic, a reminder that sometimes the mind clings to reality, and sometimes reality clings back. Weeks passed. I tried to resume life, returning to remote work, avoiding the docklands entirely, but fear is sticky. It clings to small things, a door creak, a reflection in a dark window, the faint tap behind a wall. I avoided mirrors, avoided empty rooms, avoided quiet. The moral of that night settled in gradually. Fear isn't always about monsters or shadows. It's about the denial of perception, the refusal to acknowledge warning signs. My mind had told me I was safe, that I was alone. But sometimes, trusting too much in what should be real blinds you to what truly is. I began keeping a small recorder on my desk, more as a ritual than for protection. The first night, it captured nothing. The second, faint taps. The third, a whisper, almost indecipherable, still here. My heart raced, and I stopped listening after a few seconds, not because I doubted it, but because the acknowledgement was worse than ignorance. I learned to live with the possibility, a cautious respect for the unseen and unheard. That apartment, that fog, the taps, Whatever it was remained an enigma, but one that had changed me irrevocably. I no longer ignored my instincts. I no longer dismissed subtle warnings. I eventually moved, leaving the apartment permanently behind, but I carry that night with me, not as a story to scare others, but as a lesson to myself. Silence can be deceptive, and the term, things we think we understand, are often only fragments of a deeper, more unsettling reality. Some nights, alone in my new apartment, I think I hear a tap not from the walls, but from memory. My pulse quickens. I check the room, rationalize, and tell myself it's nothing. And yet, I know better. Life, like the fog, can obscure danger until it's almost too late. The trick is to listen, to trust the instincts that whisper even when reason tells you otherwise. That night, the apartment taught me that fear isn't weakness, it's a signal. And ignoring it can cost more than just sleep. The world often communicates in whispers and subtleties. Ignoring warning signs and rationalizing danger can invite harm. Paying attention, even to small instincts, can be the difference between safety and peril.
I moved to this city about 8 months ago, and honestly, it's been going pretty well. New job, new apartment, new people. I'm a real estate agent, so I'm usually out meeting clients or driving around different neighborhoods, showing properties. My schedule's flexible, which I like, but it also means my days can feel kind of unpredictable. I don't know many people here yet, so most nights it's just me, takeout, and my laptop. The place I live in is decent, a small flat in a quiet lane on the edge of the city. Most of the neighbors keep to themselves. You can hear dogs barking from somewhere at night, but otherwise it's peaceful. That's why what happened still feels so strange. It's like my whole sense of peace here got shattered overnight. It was a Friday evening around 6 or 7 p.m. I came home after a long day and saw a white envelope taped to my front door. At first I thought it was just a property notice or a flyer, but when I got closer I noticed something odd. My name was written on it in neat handwriting. Jake. No last name, no address. Just my first name. That threw me off. Inside was a small handwritten note that said, "Hey Jake, I've wanted to meet you for a while. I'll be waiting at the old gas station by the highway tomorrow evening. Don't be late. Your close one." There was no phone number, no explanation, nothing. Just that. I actually laughed out loud for a second because it felt like some prank. But then the more I thought about it, the less funny it became. The phrase, "your close one," sounded off. I didn't have any close ones here, not yet. Still, I didn't take it too seriously. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. I figured maybe someone had the wrong address, or maybe it was just a weird client who somehow found out where I lived. The abandoned gas station part felt sketchy as hell, though. I knew which one they meant. It's about 15 minutes away, been shut down for years. Rusted pumps, broken windows, and no lights after dark. No way I was going there. That night, I locked up as usual and went to bed. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep easily. The note kept replaying in my head. The handwriting, that strange, "your close one" signature. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and dozed off. The next morning was normal. I made coffee, scrolled through listings, and went out to meet a client. It was only when I got back home later that evening that I noticed something taped to the door again. Another envelope. Same handwriting. This one was a lot shorter. It said, "I waited. You didn't show up. I thought you were different. Don't ignore me again." The tone was completely different, almost angry. That was the first time I felt real unease. It was weird enough to get one letter, but a second one, handwritten, delivered right to my door while I was gone. Someone had to know my schedule. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring at it. My first instinct was to call the police, but then I stopped myself. What would I even say? "Hey, someone's leaving me weird letters?" It didn't sound serious enough to report. So I did the dumb thing. I brushed it off. I locked the door, ordered dinner, and tried to distract myself with a movie. But even while watching, I couldn't stop glancing toward the door. Every small noise from outside made my heart jump a little. When I finally went to bed, I made sure to double-check every lock in the apartment. Later that night, everything spiraled. It was around 1 a.m., I couldn't sleep and was feeling a little hungry, so I decided to cook something, eat, and finish the web series. Since I had no important work or plans the next day, I didn't mind sleeping late. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and an omelet. I had my headphones in, listening to some music, when I heard a faint, sharp thud somewhere upstairs. I froze, pulled off my headphones, and cautiously crept to the top of the stairs, peering around. Everything looked perfectly normal. Nothing seemed out of place. I told myself it was probably a cat or maybe something fell. Shrugging it off, I went back to the kitchen and started preparing my omelet again. Just as I was chopping onions, a strange mechanical sound, like that of a cutting machine or something, echoed through the hallway. I paused, set down the knife, and glanced around. Hallway empty, living room quiet. I thought maybe one of the neighbors was doing something, so I shook my head and tried to focus on cooking. Once the omelet was done, I poured coffee, sat down on the couch, and started the series, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. Then I saw it, a shadow, flickering across the living room wall, just for a second, but it was unmistakable. My heart slammed against my chest. I froze, completely still, staring at the dark corner of the room. Slowly, I crept upstairs to check, and that's when I saw it. The balcony window glass was cracked, a jagged line running through it. Near the sill lay a live cartridge. My stomach dropped. Someone had been inside. Someone had entered my apartment. I froze completely. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Then I slowly reached for my phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was inside my house and had a gun. They told me to stay quiet and hide. So I crouched behind the kitchen counter, heart pounding so hard it felt like the intruder could hear it. I kept staring toward the hallway, waiting for footsteps, movement, anything. For about 5 minutes I heard nothing except my own breathing. Then, faintly, the sound of a door creaking somewhere upstairs. My bedroom. By the time the police arrived, which felt like an eternity, I was drenched in sweat. They checked every room, the balcony, the storage area. No one was there. But they found things that made my stomach twist. My bedroom was wide open. My documents, property papers, ID copies, bank files, were all scattered across the bed. My laptop had been smashed on the floor, and that cracked balcony window, like someone entered through it. One of the officers, a serious-looking guy, said, "Show me the bullet you found." 9 mmHp, he said quietly, glancing at the marking. But old. Police usually have these bullets, he thoughtfully said. They took photos, collected fingerprints, and told me to stay somewhere else for the night. I couldn't even argue. I packed a few things and drove to a friend's place across town. The next few days were chaos. The police reviewed the nearby street cameras and found footage of a man walking toward my building around midnight, wearing a hood, gloves, and a cap. He'd parked an old white car down the lane and kept his face turned from the cameras. But when he got closer, one frame caught enough light to show his face clearly, and the police recognized him. His name was Leo, a suspended cop. Apparently, he'd been off duty for months because of corruption charges, used to work in evidence handling. The same department that once dealt with a property fraud case I'd been indirectly connected to when I was still working in another city. That's when everything started to click. I realized he must have known about a set of digital files I'd kept from that case, evidence that hasn't yet reached to trial. I had copies of old emails and financial records on my laptop. Maybe he knew I still had something he needed to destroy. I don't know how he tracked me down here, but he did. When they told me this, I felt this cold wave of anger and fear at the same time. That night in my kitchen, when I heard him, he wasn't just breaking in randomly. He came for something specific. They eventually caught Leo about a week later. He was staying in a cheap hotel 2 towns over, trying to sell a bunch of old police equipment online. The gun he owned matched the bullet left near my window. He confessed quickly once they showed him the footage. Apparently, he'd been watching me for weeks, learning my schedule, checking when I left for work. He'd even parked near my house a few times pretending to be an officer on duty, which explains why a few neighbors said they saw a police car nearby recently. He told the police he just wanted to get back what was his, which made no sense to me. I didn't owe him anything. Anyway, they charged him with breaking and entering, illegal possession, and intimidation. He took a plea deal and got only 10 months in jail. That's it. When I heard that, I honestly couldn't believe it. 10 months for stalking, breaking into my home and threatening my safety. But that's how the system works sometimes. He lost his job permanently, at least. Still, even after all that, I couldn't relax. You'd think once someone like that's behind bars, you'd feel relief. But it's the opposite, because you know they'll get out eventually. Every night I kept checking the locks twice, then 3 times. I'd leave the lights on sometimes even when I tried to sleep. I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside the bed. I didn't even feel comfortable at work anymore. I'd catch myself scanning parking lots trying to see if anyone was watching me. Once, I thought I saw that same white car again, parked across the street. My hand started shaking uncontrollably until I realized it was just a similar model. Still, the paranoia never really went away. Even when I moved to a new city a few months later, I couldn't shake it. I picked an apartment on the top floor this time. Fewer entry points. Installed security cameras, better locks, motion sensors, everything. But the feeling stayed. That quiet thought that maybe someone still knows where I live. I'd been driving through the desert for hours, the kind of lonely stretch of highway that makes you feel like the world's already forgotten you. The sun had set hours ago, but the sky still glowed faintly orange, like it couldn't quite let go. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus on the cracked asphalt in front of me. My car hummed along steadily, the only sound besides the wind brushing past the open window. I had this playlist of random songs on, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was tangled up in thoughts I'd been running from for years. Mistakes, regrets, things I wish I could erase. That's what this trip was supposed to be, a way to escape myself, if only for a little while. The desert has a way of making you feel small, almost insignificant. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the endless stretch of nothingness behind me and tried to imagine that for once, no one could find me. No one could touch the parts of me I wanted to hide. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts echo in ways that get under your skin. And then I saw him. A figure standing by the side of the road, thumb out, silhouetted against the fading sun. My gut tightened. Most people would have kept going, but something about him made me hesitate. He didn't look like a regular hitchhiker. There was a strange composure to the way he stood, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed but not careless. Maybe I was just desperate for human contact, or maybe I was foolish. Either way, I slowed the car to a stop. "Need a ride?" I called. He smiled, small, too calm. "Yeah, thanks. Trying to get to Cactus Creek." I hesitated. That was where I was headed. It felt too coincidental, but I unlocked the door anyway. "Hop in." He got in without a word, settling into the passenger seat with this strange ease, like he belonged there. I glanced at him quickly. He was in his mid-30s, I guessed, with dark hair and eyes that didn't quite reflect the sunset behind him. Too steady, too intense. "I'm Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. "Jack," he replied. We drove for a few minutes in silence. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to place what made me feel uneasy. He wasn't saying anything overtly threatening, just quietly observing me, occasionally glancing out the window. "So, what do you do?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "Travel," he said. "Mostly. Meeting people." I nodded, my stomach tightening. There was something about the way he said it. Casual, like he wasn't just talking about traveling, but about knowing people in a way that unsettled me. I shook it off. I was just overthinking it. Then he spoke again, soft, almost a whisper. You shouldn't have left that day. I froze. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Excuse me? I asked. That thing that happened with your friend in Denver. You thought it was just a mistake, but I know. My pulse jumped. He wasn't supposed to know that. I hadn't told anyone, not a soul. I don't know what you're talking about, I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled again, that same unsettling smile. You really thought no one remembered? No one ever remembers? My heart raced, my mind spinning. I tried to calm myself. Maybe he was bluffing, maybe he'd guessed something from social media, but the way he said it felt personal. Too personal. I pulled over to the side of the road. I think you should get out. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I don't think so. You're going to help me get there. Before I could react, he reached over and twisted the keys. The car lurched slightly. My stomach dropped. Panic shot through me. What the hell are you doing? You're not going anywhere until I say so, he said, calm, almost bored. I tried to pull the door handle, but it was locked. My hands shook uncontrollably. I considered jumping out of the moving car, but that was suicide out here. I cursed myself for stopping, for giving him the chance. My mind raced, searching for any way out. You don't know me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You don't know what I've been through. You shouldn't be here. He tilted his head, studying me like I was some fragile thing he could break. I know more than you think. That's why I'm here. You thought you could run from it, didn't you? The desert stretched endlessly on either side of us, empty except for the faint glow of distant headlights on parallel roads. My palms were slick with sweat. I kept my eyes on the road, pretending I was still in control, but every muscle in my body screamed that I wasn't. Then I saw it, an old turnout just ahead. It wasn't much, just a dirt pull-off with a couple of rocks, but it was enough. I swerved sharply, forcing him to lurch against the seatbelt. Hold on, I shouted, heart hammering. Jack laughed, low and amused. Nice try. I pressed down on the accelerator, pretending I wasn't panicking. And then, in a split-second decision fueled by desperation, I grabbed the wheel with both hands and jerked it hard toward the dirt. The car skidded, kicking up dust and gravel, but I managed to stop it without flipping. Get out! I screamed, flinging the door open. Jack froze, his eyes narrowing. You don't know what you're doing, he said. I don't care, I yelled. I'm not letting you control me. I bolted into the desert, boots crunching against the gravel, sand and dust whipping at my face. I kept running until the car disappeared behind a bend in the road. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear him shouting my name, but it was muffled, lost in the wind and the emptiness around me. Eventually, I made it back to the highway and flagged down a passing car. I was shaking so badly that the driver could barely understand me. They called the cops and I gave a full description, trying to remember every detail of Jack's face, every word he said. But even as I spoke to the officers, part of me was already wondering, how did he know? How did he know about Denver, about my past, about all the mistakes I'd tried to bury? The police searched the area, but there was no sign of him. No footprints in the sand that made sense, just the skid marks from the car and a faint trail leading toward the horizon. They suggested it could be a drifter, a psychotic traveler, or someone with a personal vendetta. But no one had any real leads. That night, in the motel they drove me to, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every shadow cast by the flickering streetlight outside my window made my heart lurch. I kept checking the locks, peering through the blinds, imagining him out there, waiting, watching, knowing I'd exposed a piece of my past he could exploit. And then I realized something worse. Even if he was caught, even if he disappeared, He had left me with the knowledge that nothing I could do would erase the past. He had reminded me that guilt isn't something you outrun. It follows, it lingers, and sometimes it takes the form of a person staring at you with a terrifying smile on an empty highway. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, imagining all the ways he could come back, all the ways he could get me. And I knew, somewhere deep down, that I wasn't really safe. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The desert stretched endlessly outside my window, dark and silent. I kept my phone in hand, fingers hovering over 911, every shadow, every whisper of wind setting my nerves on edge. I knew I'd survive tonight, but survival didn't mean peace. It meant constant vigilance, a perpetual looking over my shoulder, wondering if the past I thought I'd buried had just found a way to hunt me down. I needed to get away. The breakup had hit me harder than I'd anticipated, and the city felt suffocating, everyone buzzing with their own lives while I was stuck replaying every mistake I'd made. I needed isolation, quiet, somewhere I could think without anyone's face flashing in my mind every time I blinked. That's how I ended up booking the Pinecrest Retreat, a rustic cabin somewhere in the remote Northeast. The listing boasted total privacy and a beautiful woodsy view, 45 minutes from the nearest town, exactly what I wanted. I arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the snow-capped pines. The cabin sat slightly off the main road, a mix of rustic charm and personal touches that made it feel lived in. Hand-carved bears on the mantel, faded floral curtains, a stack of well-read books on the windowsill. I felt a flicker of contentment, thinking maybe this week I could breathe again. The snow hadn't started yet, but the air smelled crisp, almost metallic, hinting at the storm coming. Day 2 woke me to a thick blanket of snow. The whole world was muffled, quiet except for the distant groan of pine branches weighed down by ice. I spent the day reading by the fireplace, letting the warmth seep into my shoulders. Around dusk, I stepped out onto the porch to grab more firewood. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Small, leather boots, worn and uneven, circling the cabin, stopping at each window. My heart did a flip. I told myself it had to be the caretaker checking the pipes. The rental company assured me no one was coming. Still, I couldn't shake the spike of unease. I called it paranoia and carried the wood inside. The next day, the snow had piled even higher, and fresh footprints appeared again. This time, there was something more deliberate. A small, perfectly arranged pile of smooth river stones on the porch railing. I picked them up, turning them over in my hands. No note, no explanation. My curiosity outweighed my fear, and by mid-afternoon I found myself following the tracks a short way into the woods. They ended abruptly behind a clump of pines. I returned to the cabin, telling myself it was just some eccentric local who had discovered the retreat, someone harmless. That night, the soft crunch of snow outside my window woke me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I sat up, heart hammering, and whispered into the dark, "Hello? Is someone there?" The steps stopped immediately. Silence. Goosebumps prickled my arms. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but I couldn't lie to the way my chest tightened. By day 4, I was done pretending. My curiosity, tinged with fear, had become unbearable. Bundled in my thickest coat, I traced the path of the footprints deeper into the forest, careful not to leave a trail. About 200 yards in, partially hidden by a snow-laden pine, I found it. A dilapidated trapping shack. The wood was gray and weathered, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. I pressed my face to a cracked window, peering inside. My blood ran cold. The single room was a shrine to the cabin. Faded photographs of a young couple lined the walls, and a crude table held dozens of small, personal items. A ceramic mug identical to the one in the kitchen, a vintage salt shaker, a woman's hairbrush, and most chillingly, a recent crumpled grocery receipt with my name printed clearly across the top. I stumbled back from the window, hands trembling. Someone had been watching me. Not just anyone. Someone who had once lived here. Someone who knew me enough to collect scraps of my life. That night, I slept with one eye open. The image of the shack burned into my mind. Around 2 a.m, I was stirred not by footsteps but by a faint movement near the fireplace. I froze. The screen rattled softly. I crept to my bedroom door and peered out. There he was, frail, white-haired, hunched slightly, humming a tuneless song. He was arranging fresh pine cones on the hearth as though setting a stage for an audience that only he could see. I swallowed hard, disbelief battling fear. My instinct was to run, but I needed to understand. "Hello?" I said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur?" His head snapped toward me. For a second, the eyes were vacant, clouded with confusion. Then they focused, and his expression twisted. Not confusion anymore. Pure, territorial rage. "You," he snarled, voice cracking. "You're in Eleanor's chair. Get out of my house." I stepped back, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I barely processed what was happening. He lunged for the cast iron poker by the fireplace. My instincts kicked in. I bolted. Barefoot, I sprinted to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt, my fingers numb. His boots pounded behind me, closer, faster than I thought a man his age could move. I felt his breath, or imagined it, brush the back of my neck. Finally, I managed to throw the door open and slam it shut. The thud of his body hit the door from inside, rattling the frame, and a guttural scream filled the cabin. "Get out of my house! Thief!" Snow whipped against my face as I scrambled to my car, my feet slicing against the icy ground. I dug furiously, shivering, hands numb, finally getting the engine to turn over. As I sped down the mountain road, the lights of the cabin shrinking behind me, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, watching, waiting. The police met me at the bottom of the hill. They were calm, collected, almost dismissive when I described the incident. They found Arthur in his armchair by the fire, quietly holding the hairbrush, speaking softly as though Eleanor was sitting there beside him. They assured me he was harmless, that dementia had confused him. I tried to believe them, but I couldn't. I had seen the flash in his eyes, the feral, protective, unhinged intensity that wasn't just confusion. He wasn't simply lost in memory. He was defending something, a life, a love, a home that belonged to him, and that intensity had almost killed me. Back in the city, the fear didn't leave. Every creak in my apartment made me jump. Every shadow, every unfamiliar sound set my nerves on edge. I can't explain it. I know logically that Arthur is behind bars, that he's back in his care facility, safe and contained. But my mind replays the cabin over and over. The quiet crunch of snow outside my window, the way he moved through the shadows, the raw fury when he saw me sitting in a chair that wasn't mine. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear soft footsteps on the floorboards, or the faint scrape of something being moved. I know it's just my imagination, my panic, my memory of that night. But I also know the truth. It's not monsters I need to fear. Sometimes, it's people. Lost souls defending memories, love, and spaces that no longer exist. And when that memory collides with someone else's presence, the line between pity and peril disappears in an instant. I can't go back to Pinecrest. I don't think I ever will. Even now, as I sit here in my apartment with the city lights outside my window, I keep looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him. And maybe that's what haunts me most, the understanding that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quietly, patiently, and strikes in the blink of an eye. When I first moved to the city, I wasn't looking for much. Just a clean place I could afford, somewhere quiet where I could start fresh after leaving my small hometown. I just landed a new job as a junior graphic designer and didn't know a single person here. I found the ad online. Room available. Quiet professional preferred. The photos showed a spacious, slightly old apartment with tall windows and wooden floors that creaked just enough to feel homey. Rent was cheap, location was good, and the roommate, a woman named Chloe, seemed normal enough when we first met. She had this calm, polite way about her. Soft voice, neat handwriting, no weird questions. She said she worked night shifts at a private clinic, so we'd barely overlap schedules. For me, that sounded ideal. No small talk, no shared dinners, no forced friendship. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. She'd leave around 6 p.m., come back sometime after midnight, and stay in her room most of the day. We barely spoke except for the occasional, "Hey morning," or "Do you need the laundry machine?" The apartment stayed clean, the bills were paid on time, and I actually felt at peace. Until the small things started. It began with my cereal. My favorite, the chocolate kind I specifically hid on the top shelf. One morning it was half gone. Not just less. Half gone. I stared at the box, trying to remember if I'd been stress snacking the night before. Maybe I had. I was staying up late working on client projects, losing track of time and meals. Then it was the TV volume. I always leave it on an even number, little OCD thing. But twice in a row I found it set to 13. Once again I brushed it off. Maybe the remote glitched. Maybe Chloe had watched something before work. And then one night, I found a single blonde hair on my pillow, long, straight, golden blonde. Chloe was a brunette. I don't even have blonde friends. It was such a small thing, but it made my chest feel tight. I told myself it was probably from a coworker brushing past me, or maybe it came from the laundry. But something about it just didn't sit right. A week later, things got weirder. It was around 2 p.m., a weekday, and I was home working on a client logo. The apartment was dead quiet except for my keyboard clicking. Then I heard the front door open. I froze, hand hovering over the mouse. The door closed softly. Footsteps followed. "Chloe?" I called out. Silence. I stood up and peeked out of my room. The hallway was empty. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, Chloe's door, closed as always. I knocked lightly. "Hey, Chloe, you home early?" No answer. When I turned the knob, it didn't budge. Locked, like always. I walked through the whole apartment twice, even looked out the peephole to the hallway. Nobody. And yet when I came back to the kitchen, there was a cup of tea sitting on the counter, steam rising, still warm. I hadn't made it. That night I couldn't focus on work. Every creak of the floor or buzz of the fridge made my stomach twist. I even messaged Chloe. Me. "Hey, were you home earlier?" Chloe. "No, I just got to work." "Why?" Me. "Nothing, just thought I heard the door." She replied with a smiley face. "That's all. I didn't sleep much that night." A few days later, my boyfriend came over for the first time. His name's Ryan. He's the kind of guy who jokes about everything, even serious stuff. I didn't tell him about the weird things because I didn't want to sound paranoid. We cooked pasta, watched a movie, and talked about maybe getting our own place once I got more stable at work. Everything felt normal again. At one point, Ryan got up to use the bathroom. When he came back, he looked a bit puzzled. "Hey," he said, "did you change your shampoo?" I frowned. "No, why?" "The one in your shower smells different, like that cheap floral kind. Didn't think that was your style." I blinked. "Wait, my shower?" "Yeah, the one next to your room." My blood ran cold. "That's not my bathroom, that's Chloe's." He paused. "Oh, sorry, I must have gone into the wrong one." But he looked unsettled now too. I got up and went to her door. It was locked, like always. I knocked softly. "Chloe?" No answer. Ryan tilted his head. "Is she at work?" "Yeah, she should be." "Then why's her bathroom stuff changed?" That question stuck in my head like a splinter. I called the landlord the next morning. I told him there'd been weird things happening. Nothing major, just unsettling. He said he understood and that he had a master key in case of emergencies. That night, Ryan came over again. I told him I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Chloe. He didn't argue. He just said, "Then let's check." It felt wrong, violating someone's privacy, but fear has a way of pushing you past guilt. When the landlord arrived and unlocked her door, the three of us stood there in the dim hallway, hearts pounding. The room was almost empty. No posters, no decorations, no clothes hanging, just a neatly made bed, a desk, and an old suitcase in the corner. The closet door was closed. Ryan opened it. Inside, hanging neatly, were 3 wigs: blonde, red, black. On the shelf were several silicone face masks. One of them looked exactly like me. I remember stumbling back, pressing a hand over my mouth. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. The suitcase was half open. Ryan flipped the lid all the way back. Inside were stacks of stolen mail, all with different names and photos, fake IDs, wigs, and one crumpled envelope with my name on it. But the worst thing wasn't any of that. At the very bottom of the suitcase was a printed photo of me. A photo from my Instagram, taken in my old bedroom, smiling, with the eyes carefully cut out. The police came that night. They took everything. We learned later that Chloe wasn't her real name. She was a wanted con artist who'd been moving from city to city for years, finding roommates, studying their habits, learning their passwords, their bank info, their routines. Then she'd vanish with their money, sometimes even their identity. And there was something else, a murder case from 3 years ago. Her previous roommate. The file said personal motive and identity theft. I couldn't process it. I just kept thinking about how polite she was, how quiet, how normal. She hadn't been living with me. She'd been studying me, rehearsing to become me. They told me she'd probably fled the city before the police arrived. She was skilled at changing her appearance. "You were lucky," one officer said. "Most people don't catch on until it's too late." Lucky. That night I stayed at Ryan's place. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mask, my face, cold and empty, hanging in her closet. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. I'd walk home from work and swear I saw someone across the street, same height, same build. Once, when I stopped at a cafe, I noticed a woman with blonde hair sitting alone by the window. She turned her head slightly when I looked, and even though I couldn't see her face clearly, something about the way she tilted her head made my stomach twist. I went home immediately, double-locked every door, every window. I stopped using social media for a while. The police said she was gone, that she'd likely left the state. But I still get random messages sometimes, blank accounts, no profile pictures, with usernames that look like scrambled versions of mine. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just spam. But sometimes when I scroll too long and see an old picture of myself smiling, I wonder if she's looking at that same photo somewhere too, practicing that smile in the mirror, waiting. I had always been careful, obsessively so, some might say. I spent years saving, scrimping, and double-checking every detail before buying my first house, a modest 2-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Perfect layout, modern wiring, a smart thermostat, security cameras, carbon monoxide detectors, and a garage door with a code I alone knew. Nothing could go wrong, I thought. At first, the house lived up to every expectation. The paint smelled fresh, the floors gleamed, and the neighbors were polite without being intrusive. I could almost feel myself relaxing for the first time in years. But then, a week after moving in, the first odd thing happened. It was just past midnight when the carbon monoxide detector on the kitchen ceiling started screaming. That shrill, piercing beep that instantly makes your chest tighten. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and ran through the house, opening windows, flipping breakers, checking every vent. Nothing. No smell, no smoke, no gas. Just silence, and the detector blaring like a banshee. I called the fire department. 3 officers came, took readings, checked the basement, the furnace, every room. All clear, one of them said. Could be a false alarm. Detectors get sensitive sometimes. I nodded, but as they left, the unease didn't fade. It never really did. Then came the window. The guest room window wouldn't latch. I twisted, jiggled, pushed, nothing. It clicked sometimes, teased me with a sense of normalcy, then slipped open again. I chalked it up to shoddy installation, but it gnawed at me. The first few times it was minor, something a handyman could fix. That's how I met Ray. Ray's Reliable Repairs, the card read. No job too small, no hour too late. Call anytime. He showed up on a Tuesday morning, a broad grin plastered across his face, hair slicked back, shirt tucked in perfectly. He carried a toolbox that looked too heavy for someone so casual. "I hear you've got a stubborn window," he said, his voice warm, easy. He didn't shake my hand right away, just scanned the room like he already knew it, then started kneeling beside the sill. I watched, cautious but impressed. 20 minutes later, the window clicked perfectly into place. "I'll leave it at that," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "But if anything else gives you trouble, call me. I'll make it right." And he did. The next week, the thermostat stopped responding to my phone. He showed up at 8 p.m., right when I got home from work, fixed the wiring, and explained everything in simple terms. I was impressed, even grateful. He charged a fair price, smiled, and left. No fuss. I started to trust him, more than I should have, as I would soon realize. Weeks went by and little things continued. A weird chill in the basement that my thermostat couldn't account for. My smart lights blinking briefly on their own. I thought it was just the quirks of a new house, so I called Ray. And he always fixed it. Always. One night, I was working late, a little too focused on debugging some code, when I noticed something on my router logs. An unknown device had connected. No name, just an unfamiliar MAC address. It came online at 2:03 a.m., stayed for exactly 7 minutes, then vanished. My heart skipped. I double-checked my devices. None were connected. The timing was precise. It was too consistent to be a glitch. I tried to push it aside, telling myself Ray was just tech-savvy, maybe a security consultant for some of his clients. But the thought nagged at me. Then the thermostat. I woke up one night freezing, covered in sweat, because the smart thermostat read 55 degrees. I had set it to 70 the night before. My computer logs showed I hadn't touched it. No one else had a code. I stayed awake until dawn, heart racing, piecing things together in a way that made me nauseous. Every problem Ray fixed had a subtle sign of tampering beforehand. Someone was planting problems just to solve them, and Ray was the only common factor. The trap formed in my mind. I told him I'd be out of town for the weekend, my voice casual over the phone. "Nothing planned, just a friend's wedding," I said. But I stayed at a friend's apartment 3 miles away, laptop in hand, security feeds open, hidden cameras, motion sensors, full-on paranoia mode. Saturday night came. 2 a.m. The street was silent. My laptop pinged, a car pulling into the driveway. No headlights, just the silhouette of a van sliding quietly up the street. My stomach dropped. I focused on the garage feed. The garage code? Ray used it. The door swung open silently. My pulse raced. This was it, the moment I'd feared. I watched him step inside like he owned the place. No forced entry, no hesitation, just in. I couldn't move. My throat was dry. My hands trembled as I watched him pass the kitchen, heading straight for my office. He didn't touch anything else, didn't open drawers or cabinets. He sat at my desk like it belonged to him and pulled out a small, sleek device, a black rectangle with wires. My stomach lurched as I recognized it for what it was, a hardware keylogger, capable of capturing everything typed, every password, every document. He worked calmly, almost casually, the faint hum of the device connecting to my computer filling the room. My living room lights flickered. I could hear the faint creak of his chair against the floor, and it was intimate, terrifying. He knew I was watching. He knew. Then he turned. And for just a second, our eyes met. The charming, friendly mask was gone, the grin erased. He knew I had him. And yet there was nothing I could do. "Ben," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend. "You've done well to notice. Most people wouldn't." My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to call the cops, but even as I reached for my phone, he was already up, stepping closer. Calm, deliberate. "I fix problems," he continued. "That's my job. And sometimes people create them themselves. You should have trusted me." He paused, just a foot away now. I could smell his cologne, cheap but distinct. My mind raced 1,000,000 miles an hour. The camera feeds, the logs, the tampering, it all clicked together. Ray hadn't been fixing problems. He'd been creating them. Slowly, carefully, all to gain access to my home, to my life. And now he was here. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then, like a shadow, he slipped past me, heading for the door. My fingers barely grazed his sleeve. I tried to shout, but my voice cracked. Nothing came out. He was gone. Quietly, impossibly, out the front door, into the night. I bolted to the door seconds later, heart hammering, and looked outside. Nothing. Just the dark street, empty. Not even his van. I ran to the nearest neighbor and called 911. By the time the officers arrived, the van was gone, the street quiet again. They searched the house, asked questions, took statements. Nothing. No sign of him. No forced entry. Nothing that could prove anything. I spent that night on the couch, every sound in the house amplified. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every creak a warning. My mind wouldn't stop replaying what I had seen. The calm, smiling intruder in my office, the device he had planted. The next day I changed every code, every lock, every password. I even installed additional cameras. But I knew it was too late. Ray had already been inside, already had access. I didn't know what he took, what he recorded, how much he knew. And worse, I knew he would be back. Weeks later, I got a notification from my bank. Suspicious logins from devices I didn't recognize. Small transactions, test runs, maybe just a taste. I shut everything down, called the fraud department, froze accounts. But I knew it was just a matter of time. Ray's business, that friendly handyman front, had probably been running this same scheme for years, targeting people like me, meticulous, successful, alone in their homes, gaining trust, slipping in, planting devices. I realized with a sinking feeling that every repair call I'd made had been carefully orchestrated. Every problem a test of access. Every smile, every friendly handshake a way to disarm suspicion. And yet, even knowing all this, I felt the panic creeping back whenever the phone rang or a knock came at the door. Because I knew it could be him. Maybe he was scouting again. Maybe he already had another device somewhere in the house I hadn't found. Maybe he was still inside the systems I trusted so blindly. The terrifying part was not even the theft or the breach. It was the intimacy of it. The way he had known my routines, my home, my life. He had been inside, seen my world, touched it, without me even noticing. And when he had faced me, that calm, confident gaze, I had known there was nothing I could do. Ray got away. The police had nothing to work with. My house was technically secure now, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every knock, every unexpected sound made me flinch. Every repair call, every contractor coming in made my stomach tighten. I never invited him back. I never called him again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I see his van parked at the end of the street. Or I catch a fleeting shadow from my window. And I remember that calm, terrifying smile, the one that said, without words, "I've been inside your life, and I can come back anytime." Because the fixer, the problem solver, was also the problem, and he's still out there. I'd spent years in the city surrounded by noise, deadlines, and people who never stopped talking. By the time I found the listing for Whispering Pines, I was ready to disappear. The photos showed everything I wanted. A small cabin tucked into a sea of green, tall pines all around. The nearest neighbor a good mile away. The email from the seller was simple, except for one strange line near the end. Mr. Abernathy, the longtime caretaker, requests the new owner to follow his written guidelines for upkeep. They are not optional. I figured it was just some old-timer's obsession with chores. I didn't think twice. When I drove up there for the first time, the air was so clean, it almost hurt to breathe. The cabin sat in perfect silence like it had been waiting for me. A woman in her 50s stood on the porch, arms folded, coat zipped up to her neck. "Ben, right?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Clara Doyle. I handle the property for Mr. Abernathy." That name again. I'd expected to meet the man himself, but she quickly shut that down. He's not well enough for visits these days. Still keeps an eye on things, though. This place has been his life for over 50 years. She handed me a heavy envelope. Inside was a ring of keys, a small brass compass, and several handwritten pages titled, "The Upkeep of the Place. To be followed without exception." I chuckled. "He takes this stuff seriously, huh?" She didn't smile. "He takes the place seriously." That night I read through the list. At first I laughed, then I didn't. The bird feeder by the east window must be filled with black oil sunflower seeds every Monday and Thursday. The blueberry bush by the stone wall is not to be pruned. It knows its own shape. The fireplace flue must be swept on the first Saturday of the month, regardless of use. Under no circumstances is the old white pine on the northern property line to be cut, trimmed, or harmed. The handwriting was so neat it almost felt unnatural. I tossed the pages onto the counter and poured myself a drink. I wasn't going to let some dead pine tree or bird feeder schedule run my life. The first week was everything I'd hoped for. No traffic, no alarms, no neighbors. Just me and the whisper of the wind through the trees. By the second week, I'd forgotten about the bird feeder completely. Thursday morning, when I stepped outside with my coffee, I stopped dead. A chickadee lay on the doormat. Dead. Perfectly placed in the center. Its wings were folded, its eyes open. I stood there staring at it. The bird feeder above the east window was empty. I told myself a hawk must have dropped it, or maybe a cat. Still, it bothered me. The precision of it. I buried the little thing behind the shed and tried not to think about it. Later that evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Bennett?" a woman's voice asked. "Yeah?" "This is Clara Doyle. Mr. Abernathy asked me to remind you about the bird feeder. Thursday's passed." I froze. How would he even know that? Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "He has his ways." Then she hung up. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I looked toward the east window, I half expected to see something watching me back. A few weeks later, a cold snap hit. I decided to use the fireplace for the first time. I'd skimmed past the rule about cleaning the flue. Figured it didn't matter. At around 2 in the morning, I woke coughing, the air thick with smoke. I stumbled through the haze toward the door, flinging it open, and through the rising smoke I saw him. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, thin, still, watching. The porch light flickered, casting just enough glow for me to see the reflection of his eyes. When I blinked, he was gone. The next morning, Clara called again. "Mr. Abernathy says the chimney wasn't swept," she said quietly. "How the hell could he possibly know that?" I snapped. "The place tells him," she replied, and hung up again. After that, I started seeing things. Shadows shifting behind the trees. The faint smell of pine sap even when the windows were closed. Footprints in the snow outside the door, always leading away from the cabin. By February, I was unraveling. The rules were getting to me. I kept the list pinned above my desk, trying to follow every instruction, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that I was being graded somehow. Then came the day I made the mistake. There was this huge white pine near the northern edge of the property, the one the list said not to touch. One of its branches blocked my view of the mountains. I remember thinking how much better the place would look without it, so I grabbed my saw and cut it down. The moment the branch fell, the forest went completely silent. No birds, no wind, just stillness, and I swear I felt something watching me from inside that tree. That night the smell of sap hit me again, stronger than ever. My eyes watered from it. When I looked toward the living room, I saw a sliver of light leaking under the door. Someone was in there. I crept forward, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. When I pushed the door open, my stomach dropped. An old man was kneeling on the floor, calmly sawing through the legs of my leather armchair. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. He didn't even flinch. He just looked up at me, eyes so clear and pale they almost glowed. "You cut the arm of the pine," he said softly. "So I'm cutting the arm of your chair. The balance must be kept." My throat went dry. Who are you?" He stood slowly, brushing sawdust from his knees. "Mr. Abernathy," he said simply. The name hit me like ice. "You're supposed to be," Clara said. He smiled faintly. "Clara manages papers. I manage the place." He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "You thought you bought this land, but you only borrowed it. The woods have their keeper, always have, always will." I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. "You've been watching me," I said, barely a whisper. "I've been tending," he corrected. "You stopped listening, so now I'll do it my way." Then, without another word, he walked past me, opened the door, and stepped out into the night. The smell of pine sap lingered long after he was gone. I didn't wait for morning. I packed a single bag and drove until the gaslight came on. By the time I reached the nearest town, the sun was rising, and I could finally breathe again. At a diner off the highway, I called Clara. "Your boss broke into my house," I said. "He was there. I saw him." There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said quietly, "Ben, Mr. Abernathy died 6 years ago." I felt my skin go cold. "That's not possible." "He's buried on the property," she said, "behind the white pine." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I just sat there, staring out the window, watching the forest sway in the morning light. I sold the cabin not long after, at a huge loss. Didn't even care. The new owners, a retired couple, said they loved its character and the sweet handwritten list that came with the sale. I didn't tell them anything, but sometimes late at night I dream about the place. I see that porch light flickering faintly through the trees, like someone's still out there, keeping watch. And when I wake, I can smell pine sap, thick and sweet, as if it's still in the air around me. Some places don't belong to you. You just live in them, until they decide you don't anymore.